Curse of knowledge. Curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that occurs when someone who is knowledgeable about a particular subject has difficulty communicating with others who lack that knowledge. This phenomenon happens because experts struggle to remember what it was like not to know something they now understand well. When you become an expert in any field, your brain reorganizes information in sophisticated ways. You develop mental shortcuts, understand complex relationships, and see patterns that beginners cannot perceive. However, this expertise creates a barrier when trying to teach or explain concepts to others. You assume others share your foundational knowledge, leading to explanations that are too advanced or skip crucial steps. Teachers often fall victim to the curse of knowledge. A math professor might breeze through algebraic steps that seem obvious to them but leave students confused. They forget the struggle of learning basic concepts because those ideas have become automatic. Similarly, technical experts explaining software to users might use jargon and assume familiarity with processes that are completely foreign to their audience. The curse manifests in everyday situations too. When giving directions, you might reference landmarks that seem obvious to you but mean nothing to someone unfamiliar with the area. Parents helping children with homework sometimes become frustrated because tasks that appear simple to adult minds require different thinking processes for developing brains. This bias affects business communication significantly. Marketing teams create advertisements assuming customers understand product benefits that actually need explanation. Company leaders announce changes using internal terminology that confuses employees. Product designers build interfaces that make sense to them but puzzle users who lack their technical background. The curse of knowledge also impacts personal relationships. Partners in long-term relationships might stop explaining their thoughts clearly because they assume their significant other automatically understands their perspective. Friends sharing experiences might leave out important context because certain details feel obvious to them. Breaking free from this curse requires conscious effort and perspective-taking skills. Effective communicators learn to step back and imagine their audience's knowledge level. They ask themselves what background information might be missing and what assumptions they are making about their listeners' understanding. One helpful strategy involves explaining concepts to people with different expertise levels and observing where confusion arises. This practice reveals knowledge gaps that experts typically overlook. Another approach involves using analogies that connect new information to concepts your audience already understands well. Testing comprehension through questions helps identify when the curse strikes. Instead of asking if something makes sense, which often yields polite agreement, ask specific questions that reveal actual understanding. Request examples or ask people to explain concepts back in their own words. The most skilled communicators develop empathy for the learning process. They remember their own journey from ignorance to expertise and use that memory to guide their explanations. They break complex ideas into smaller pieces, define technical terms, and provide context that bridges knowledge gaps. Recognizing the curse of knowledge helps improve teaching, writing, public speaking, and interpersonal communication. It reminds us that clear communication requires translating our expertise into language and concepts that others can access. The goal shifts from demonstrating knowledge to successfully transferring understanding. Understanding this bias makes us more patient with ourselves and others during learning processes. It explains why expert explanations sometimes feel inadequate and why beginners need more support than experts initially realize. By acknowledging this cognitive limitation, we can work deliberately to overcome it and become more effective communicators. Serial position effect. Serial position effect is a psychological phenomenon that describes how the position of information in a sequence affects how well people remember it. This effect reveals that items at the beginning and end of a list are recalled more accurately than those in the middle positions. The effect consists of two distinct components that work together to create this memory pattern. The primacy effect explains why we remember items from the beginning of a sequence better. When you first encounter information, your attention is typically at its highest level. Your working memory has space available to process and encode these initial items thoroughly. This focused processing allows the first pieces of information to transfer more effectively into long-term memory. The recency effect accounts for superior recall of items at the end of a sequence. These final pieces of information remain fresh in your short-term memory when recall begins. Since less time has passed since encountering them, they suffer less from memory decay and interference from other information. Items in the middle positions face the greatest disadvantage. They arrive when attention may be waning and working memory is already occupied with earlier information. Additionally, middle items experience interference from both preceding and following information, making them harder to distinguish and remember clearly. This effect appears consistently across different types of information and presentation methods. Whether you are trying to remember a grocery list, names of people you meet at a party, or key points from a presentation, the same pattern emerges. Beginning and ending items stick while middle items fade. Educational settings demonstrate the serial position effect regularly. Students remember concepts introduced at the start of a lecture and points emphasized at the conclusion better than material covered during the middle portions. This pattern influences how effective teachers structure their lessons, placing crucial information at strategic positions. Marketing professionals leverage this effect when designing advertisements and product presentations. They position the most important selling points at the beginning to capture attention and at the end to leave lasting impressions. Less critical information fills the middle sections where memory performance naturally declines. Job interviews showcase this phenomenon clearly. Candidates interviewed early in the day or late in the session often receive more favorable evaluations than those interviewed during middle time slots. First impressions carry weight, and final impressions remain vivid in evaluators' minds. The effect influences legal proceedings as well. Witnesses called first and last in trials tend to make stronger impressions on juries. Attorneys strategically order their presentations to maximize the impact of their strongest evidence and arguments. Understanding the serial position effect helps optimize learning and communication strategies. When studying, you can combat this bias by paying extra attention to middle material or breaking long lists into smaller chunks. Each smaller group creates new beginning and ending positions, improving overall retention. Effective presenters structure their content to work with this natural memory pattern. They introduce key themes early to benefit from primacy effects and conclude with memorable summaries or calls to action. Important points get repeated or reinforced at multiple positions throughout the presentation. The effect also explains why certain memory techniques prove successful. Creating acronyms or memorable phrases transforms middle items into beginning or ending positions within smaller mental groups. Storytelling methods work similarly by embedding information within narrative structures that create multiple memory anchor points. Recognition of this effect encourages more strategic information organization in various contexts. Writers place crucial arguments at the beginning and end of articles. Speakers arrange their most persuasive points to capitalize on audience attention patterns. Even simple tasks like making lists benefit from awareness of position-based memory advantages. The serial position effect demonstrates how memory operates according to predictable patterns rather than random processes. By understanding these patterns, we can work with our natural cognitive tendencies instead of against them, improving both our ability to remember information and to help others retain what we share with them. Door-in-the-face technique. Door-in-the-face technique is a persuasion strategy that involves making an initial large request that is likely to be rejected, followed immediately by a smaller, more reasonable request that represents what you actually wanted all along. This psychological tactic increases the likelihood that people will agree to the second request compared to if you had made only the smaller request initially. The technique works through the principle of reciprocal concessions. When you make a large request and someone refuses, you appear to be making a concession by reducing your ask to something smaller. The other person feels psychological pressure to reciprocate this apparent compromise by agreeing to your scaled-down request. They perceive your retreat from the initial demand as a gesture of flexibility that deserves a corresponding response. The contrast effect also contributes to the technique's effectiveness. After hearing an extreme request, the follow-up proposal seems much more reasonable by comparison. A request that might have felt substantial on its own appears modest when positioned after something much larger. This perceptual shift makes people more willing to say yes to what they now view as a compromise position. Guilt and social obligation play additional roles in this process. Many people feel uncomfortable about rejecting multiple requests from the same person, especially when that person appears to be accommodating their concerns. The combination of apparent concession making and social pressure creates conditions favorable to agreement. Sales professionals frequently employ this technique in various forms. A car salesperson might first present an expensive model loaded with premium features, then guide the customer toward a less expensive option that still includes profitable add-ons. Real estate agents might show overpriced properties before presenting homes within the buyer's actual budget, making those prices seem more attractive. Fundraising organizations use this approach regularly. Charity representatives might initially ask for a significant monthly donation, then request a smaller one-time contribution when the larger commitment gets declined. The smaller amount feels manageable after the shock of the initial request, increasing donation rates compared to asking for the smaller amount directly. The technique appears in everyday interpersonal situations as well. Parents might ask teenagers to clean the entire house, then settle for having their room tidied. Children instinctively use this approach when requesting privileges, starting with extreme permissions before negotiating down to their actual goal. Business negotiations showcase this strategy frequently. Initial contract proposals often include terms that exceed what negotiators actually expect to achieve. These opening positions establish anchoring points that make subsequent concessions appear generous while still achieving favorable outcomes. However, the door-in-the-face technique requires careful execution to avoid backfiring. The initial request must be large enough to create contrast but not so extreme that it appears ridiculous or insincere. If people perceive the first request as manipulative or completely unrealistic, they may become suspicious of subsequent asks and reject them automatically. Timing between requests matters significantly. The second request should follow quickly after the first refusal, while the contrast effect remains strong. Waiting too long allows the psychological impact to diminish and reduces the technique's effectiveness. The relationship between the requester and target influences success rates. This approach works better when some level of rapport or social connection exists. Complete strangers using this technique may trigger skepticism rather than compliance, especially in contexts where people expect manipulation attempts. Cultural factors affect how this technique is received. Societies that emphasize harmony and avoiding confrontation may respond more favorably to apparent compromise making. Cultures that value direct communication might view this approach as unnecessarily complicated or manipulative. Understanding this technique helps both in applying it ethically and defending against manipulation. Recognizing when someone uses this strategy allows you to evaluate requests based on their actual merits rather than their position in a sequence. The awareness helps maintain decision-making independence when facing structured persuasion attempts. Ethical application involves ensuring that your smaller request represents genuine value for both parties rather than manipulation for personal gain. The technique works best when used to help people overcome initial resistance to beneficial agreements rather than to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Foot in the door technique. Foot in the door technique is a persuasion strategy that involves making a small initial request to increase the likelihood that someone will agree to a larger request later. This psychological approach works by first securing compliance with something minor and manageable, then building upon that initial agreement to gain acceptance for more significant demands. The technique operates through the principle of commitment and consistency. Once people agree to a small request, they experience psychological pressure to remain consistent with their previous behavior. They begin to see themselves as helpful or cooperative individuals, and this self-perception influences their response to future requests from the same person. When someone complies with an initial small request, they create internal justification for their helpful behavior. This mental process strengthens their identity as someone who assists others or supports particular causes. Subsequent larger requests tap into this established self-image, making refusal feel inconsistent with their demonstrated character. The escalation happens gradually and feels natural to both parties. The person making requests can point to previous cooperation as evidence of the relationship and shared values. The target individual finds it increasingly difficult to refuse without feeling like they are contradicting their earlier actions or disappointing someone who has come to rely on their support. Marketing campaigns frequently employ this technique with great success. Companies might first ask customers to sign up for free newsletters or samples. Once people engage with these small commitments, they become more receptive to purchasing products or subscribing to paid services. The initial engagement creates a sense of relationship and investment that facilitates larger transactions. Political campaigns use this approach when recruiting volunteers and donors. They might begin by asking supporters to display yard signs or share social media posts. These small acts of public support create psychological investment in the campaign. People who start with minor contributions often escalate to volunteering time or making financial donations. Charitable organizations master this technique through their fundraising strategies. They might first request signatures on petitions or ask people to wear awareness ribbons. These minimal commitments establish the person as someone who cares about the cause. Follow-up requests for donations or volunteer time build upon this established identity and previous engagement. The technique appears in everyday social situations as well. Someone might ask a neighbor to collect mail during a short absence, then later request house-sitting during longer trips. The initial favor establishes trust and helpfulness that makes the larger request feel like a natural extension of an existing pattern. Workplace environments showcase this approach regularly. Managers might ask employees to take on small additional tasks or participate in minor projects. Success with these assignments often leads to requests for increased responsibilities or leadership roles. The progression feels organic rather than manipulative when handled skillfully. However, the foot in the door technique requires authentic relationship building to remain ethical and effective. The initial requests must provide genuine value or serve legitimate purposes rather than existing solely to manipulate future behavior. People quickly recognize and resent purely extractive approaches. The timing between requests affects success significantly. Moving too quickly from small to large asks can trigger suspicion and resistance. Allowing time for the initial commitment to solidify and become part of someone's self-concept increases the likelihood of continued cooperation. Understanding this technique helps both in ethical application and defense against manipulation. Recognizing the pattern allows you to evaluate each request independently rather than feeling bound by previous agreements. Awareness helps maintain autonomy while still being genuinely helpful when appropriate. Illusory truth effect. Illusory truth effect is a cognitive bias where people are more likely to believe information is true simply because they have heard it repeatedly, regardless of its actual accuracy. This phenomenon demonstrates how familiarity with a statement can trick our minds into accepting it as fact, even when we have no evidence to support its validity. The effect occurs because our brains use mental shortcuts, called heuristics, to process information efficiently. When we encounter a statement multiple times, it becomes easier to recall and feels more familiar. Our cognitive system interprets this familiarity as a signal of truth, assuming that accurate information is more likely to be repeated than false information. Processing fluency plays a crucial role in this bias. Information that comes to mind easily feels more credible than information that requires effort to remember or understand. Repeated exposure makes statements flow through our consciousness more smoothly, creating a subjective sense of truthfulness that operates independently of actual facts. The effect works even when people initially know information is false. Studies show that participants who are explicitly told certain facts are incorrect still rate those same facts as more believable after repeated exposure. This demonstrates how powerful repetition can be in overriding our conscious knowledge and critical thinking abilities. Media environments amplify the illusory truth effect significantly. News stories, advertisements, and social media posts that circulate widely gain credibility through repetition alone. People begin accepting claims as established facts simply because they encounter them across multiple sources and platforms, even when those sources lack credibility or independence. Political propaganda exploits this effect systematically. Campaign messages repeated across various channels gain acceptance through familiarity rather than evidence. Slogans and talking points become believable through constant repetition, influencing voter perceptions and policy support regardless of their factual basis. Marketing professionals understand and leverage this bias routinely. Brand messages repeated across television, radio, print, and digital media create familiarity that translates into trust and credibility. Consumers begin believing product claims not because of proof, but because of repeated exposure to marketing statements. Social media accelerates the illusory truth effect through sharing and resharing mechanisms. False information can achieve widespread repetition quickly, gaining credibility as it spreads through networks. People encounter the same claims from multiple friends and sources, creating an illusion of independent verification when information is actually circulating from single sources. Educational settings can inadvertently demonstrate this effect. Students may come to believe incorrect information that appears repeatedly in textbooks or lectures, especially when that information is presented confidently and consistently. The repetition creates familiarity that feels like learning and understanding. Urban legends and conspiracy theories thrive through this mechanism. Stories that circulate repeatedly through communities gain believability through familiarity rather than evidence. People begin accepting these narratives as true because they have heard them so many times from different people. The effect influences our personal relationships and self-perception as well. Messages we hear repeatedly about ourselves, whether positive or negative, begin feeling true regardless of their accuracy. Repeated criticism can create false beliefs about our abilities, while repeated praise can generate overconfidence. Understanding the illusory truth effect helps develop critical thinking skills and media literacy. Recognizing this bias allows us to evaluate information based on evidence rather than familiarity. We can actively seek original sources and independent verification rather than accepting claims because they feel familiar. Combating this effect requires conscious effort and systematic approaches. Fact-checking information before accepting it, seeking diverse sources, and questioning repeated claims helps maintain accuracy in our beliefs. Creating deliberate pauses between hearing information and forming judgments allows more thoughtful evaluation. The effect highlights the importance of information source diversity and critical evaluation skills in our media-rich environment. By understanding how repetition influences belief formation, we can work to base our convictions on evidence and reasoning rather than mere familiarity and frequency of exposure. Zeigarnik Effect. Zeigarnik Effect is a psychological phenomenon where people have better recall for incomplete or interrupted tasks compared to completed ones. This cognitive bias demonstrates how unfinished business creates mental tension that keeps information active in our minds, while completed tasks are allowed to fade from immediate memory once they are resolved. The effect operates through what psychologists call task-specific tension systems. When we begin working on something, our minds create psychological pressure to complete it. This tension maintains heightened attention and memory activation for the unfinished task. Once we complete the task, the tension releases, and our cognitive system allows the details to move from active memory into background storage. Mental loops form around incomplete tasks, creating persistent background processing that continues even when we focus on other activities. Our brains repeatedly return to unfinished business, rehearsing details and potential solutions. This ongoing mental rehearsal strengthens memory formation and keeps the information readily accessible for recall. The effect explains why interrupted conversations feel particularly memorable and compelling. When someone begins telling you something important but gets cut off, your mind continues processing the partial information. You find yourself thinking about what they might have said and actively seeking opportunities to return to the conversation. Students experience this phenomenon regularly during their academic work. Material from incomplete assignments or partially understood concepts tends to stick in memory more persistently than information from finished projects. The mental tension around unresolved academic challenges keeps those topics actively circulating in conscious awareness. Workplace environments showcase the Zeigarnik effect consistently. Employees often find themselves thinking about unfinished projects during personal time, while completed tasks fade quickly from immediate concern. The psychological tension around incomplete work can contribute to stress and difficulty mentally disconnecting from professional responsibilities. Entertainment industries deliberately exploit this effect to maintain audience engagement. Television shows end episodes with cliffhangers, creating unresolved narrative tension that keeps viewers mentally engaged between episodes. Streaming platforms use this psychological principle to encourage binge-watching behaviors. Video games masterfully employ the Zeigarnik effect through achievement systems and progress indicators. Incomplete levels, partially filled progress bars, and unfinished collections create mental tension that motivates continued play. Players find themselves thinking about unfinished gaming objectives even when away from their devices. The effect influences our personal goal setting and productivity patterns. Partially completed projects tend to occupy more mental space than we might expect, sometimes interfering with focus on current tasks. This persistent mental background noise can contribute to feelings of overwhelm and scattered attention. Social interactions demonstrate this bias through unresolved conflicts and incomplete conversations. Arguments that end without resolution continue generating mental activity as our minds seek closure. We rehearse potential responses and imagine future discussions, keeping the conflict actively present in our consciousness. Creative professionals often experience intense versions of the Zeigarnik effect. Writers, artists, and designers frequently report that unfinished creative projects occupy persistent mental space, generating ongoing inspiration and problem-solving activity. The incomplete work continues evolving in their minds even during breaks from active creation. Understanding this effect helps explain why task completion feels so psychologically satisfying. Finishing projects provides relief from mental tension and allows cognitive resources to shift toward new challenges. The completion creates a sense of closure that permits mental relaxation around that particular issue. The Zeigarnik Effect suggests strategic approaches to productivity and learning. Breaking large projects into smaller, completable segments provides regular tension release while maintaining forward momentum. Creating clear completion points helps manage mental load and prevents cognitive overload from too many simultaneous incomplete tasks. However, the effect can become problematic when too many tasks remain unfinished simultaneously. Multiple incomplete projects create competing mental tensions that can interfere with focus and decision-making. Learning to externalize task tracking through lists and systems helps reduce the cognitive burden of remembering incomplete work. Recognizing this psychological pattern helps us work with our natural cognitive tendencies rather than against them. We can use the motivating tension of incomplete tasks while also creating systems to manage the mental load and achieve regular completion satisfaction. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is a cognitive tendency where people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they encounter when making decisions or judgments. This initial information, called the anchor, disproportionately influences all subsequent evaluations, even when the anchor is completely irrelevant or randomly generated. The bias occurs because our minds use the initial information as a reference point for comparison. Once an anchor is established, we make adjustments from that starting position rather than evaluating options independently. These adjustments are typically insufficient, keeping our final judgments closer to the original anchor than they should be based on objective analysis. Anchoring happens automatically and unconsciously in most situations. Even when people are explicitly warned about the bias or told that anchor information is meaningless, they still show its influence in their decisions. This demonstrates how deeply embedded this mental shortcut is in human cognitive processing. Retail environments exploit anchoring bias extensively through pricing strategies. Stores display expensive items first to establish high price anchors, making subsequent products seem reasonably priced by comparison. A restaurant menu might list premium dishes at the top, influencing customers to view mid-range options as moderate rather than expensive. Real estate negotiations showcase anchoring effects clearly. The initial asking price for a property strongly influences final sale prices, even when that price bears little relationship to actual market value. Buyers and sellers both use opening offers as anchors that shape the entire negotiation process. Job salary negotiations demonstrate this bias regularly. The first salary figure mentioned, whether by employer or candidate, tends to anchor the entire discussion. Even when subsequent information about market rates or qualifications emerges, final agreements often remain influenced by that initial number. Legal settings show anchoring bias in damage awards and sentencing decisions. Initial settlement demands or prosecution recommendations create anchors that influence final judgments. Juries exposed to higher anchor amounts tend to award larger damages, even when the anchor information is legally irrelevant. The bias affects everyday personal decisions as well. When estimating how long a project will take, the first-time estimate that comes to mind anchors our planning. When evaluating someone's attractiveness or intelligence, early impressions create anchors that influence ongoing perceptions. Academic settings demonstrate anchoring through grading and evaluation processes. Teachers who see one excellent essay early in a grading session may unconsciously use it as an anchor, making subsequent papers seem weaker by comparison. Standardized test scores can anchor expectations about student performance in unrelated subjects. Self-perception falls victim to anchoring bias too. Early feedback about our abilities or characteristics can create anchors that influence how we view ourselves long-term. Positive or negative labels from childhood often persist because they established powerful anchors for self-evaluation. Understanding anchoring bias helps improve decision-making processes. Recognizing when initial information might be creating undue influence allows for more objective evaluation. Seeking multiple reference points and deliberately considering ranges rather than single anchor points can reduce the bias. Professional environments can implement strategies to minimize anchoring effects. Using structured evaluation processes that consider multiple factors independently helps reduce reliance on initial impressions. Encouraging team members to suggest ranges rather than single estimates can broaden perspective beyond individual anchors. The key to managing anchoring bias lies in awareness and deliberate counter-strategies. Taking time to generate alternative starting points, seeking diverse perspectives, and questioning the relevance of initial information all help create more balanced judgments that rely less heavily on arbitrary first impressions. Reverse psychology. Reverse psychology is a persuasion technique that involves advocating for the opposite of what you actually want someone to do, with the expectation that they will rebel against your stated preference and choose the option you truly desire. This approach works by triggering people's natural resistance to being told what to do and their desire to maintain autonomy over their decisions. The technique operates through psychological reactance, a motivational state that emerges when people feel their freedom of choice is being threatened or restricted. When someone tells us we cannot or should not do something, we often experience an increased desire to do exactly that thing. Reverse psychology deliberately triggers this reactance to guide people toward specific choices. The approach works particularly well with individuals who have strong needs for independence or control. People who resist direct requests or instructions may respond positively when given permission to avoid an action or when told that something might be too difficult for them. The challenge to their capabilities or autonomy motivates them to prove the speaker wrong. Parenting situations frequently showcase reverse psychology in action. A parent might tell a reluctant child that they probably cannot clean their room properly, knowing the child will want to demonstrate their competence. Alternatively, parents might express doubt about whether their teenager is mature enough to handle certain responsibilities, motivating the teen to prove their readiness. Sales professionals employ this technique when dealing with hesitant customers. A salesperson might suggest that a particular product is probably too expensive or sophisticated for the customer, triggering their desire to prove they can afford or handle the premium option. The apparent discouragement often increases motivation to purchase. Therapeutic settings sometimes use reverse psychology to help clients overcome resistance to change. A therapist might suggest that change is probably too difficult or that the client seems comfortable with their current situation. This approach can motivate clients to argue for their own capacity for growth and transformation. Marketing campaigns occasionally employ reverse psychology through messages that seem to discourage product use. Advertisements that claim their product is not for everyone or suggest that consumers might not be ready for their offering can create intrigue and desire through exclusivity and challenge. The technique appears in romantic relationships as well, though it requires careful handling to avoid manipulation. Someone might downplay their interest or suggest their partner probably would not enjoy a particular activity, hoping to spark curiosity and initiative from the other person. However, reverse psychology carries significant risk when used inappropriately. If people recognize the manipulation attempt, it can damage trust and create resentment. The technique works best when it appears genuine rather than calculated, making authentic delivery crucial for success. Cultural factors influence how reverse psychology is received. Societies that highly value independence and individual choice may respond more strongly to this approach. Cultures that emphasize cooperation and harmony might find the technique less effective or even offensive. The success of reverse psychology depends heavily on understanding your audience. People with strong contrarian tendencies or high needs for autonomy are more likely to respond positively. Those who prefer direct communication or have trusting personalities might simply accept your stated preference at face value. Timing and relationship context matter significantly. Reverse psychology works better when some level of rapport exists and when the stakes are relatively low. Using this technique in high-pressure situations or with strangers can backfire and create negative reactions. Ethical considerations surround the use of reverse psychology. While it can be a playful way to motivate positive behaviors, using it to manipulate others for purely selfish purposes crosses ethical boundaries. The technique should serve mutual interests rather than exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Understanding reverse psychology helps both in recognizing when others use it and in applying it ethically when appropriate. Awareness of this dynamic can improve communication and help maintain autonomy when facing potential manipulation attempts. Halo Effect. Halo effect is a cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person, company, or product influences how we evaluate their specific traits or qualities. This mental shortcut causes us to let one prominent characteristic color our judgment of all other attributes, creating a metaphorical halo that makes everything appear more positive or negative than objective evaluation would suggest. The bias operates through a process of generalization where our minds automatically assume that excellence or deficiency in one area indicates similar performance across all areas. When we perceive someone as attractive, successful, or likable, we unconsciously attribute other positive qualities to them such as intelligence, competence, or moral character, even without evidence for these additional traits. Physical attractiveness demonstrates the halo effect powerfully. Research consistently shows that people perceived as physically attractive are also judged as more intelligent, kinder, more successful, and better leaders. This occurs despite no logical connection between appearance and these other qualities. The positive impression from attractiveness creates a halo that enhances perceptions of unrelated characteristics. Celebrity endorsements exploit this bias extensively. Companies hire famous personalities to promote products, knowing that positive feelings toward the celebrity will transfer to the brand. Consumers assume that if they admire an athlete or actor, the products they endorse must also be superior, even when the celebrity has no expertise in that product category. Educational environments showcase the halo effect through teacher expectations and student evaluations. Teachers who form positive impressions of students early in the school year tend to rate those students more favorably across all subjects and behaviors. A student who excels in mathematics might receive higher grades in unrelated subjects like art or social studies simply because of the positive overall impression. Corporate branding relies heavily on halo effects to influence consumer behavior. Companies that establish reputations for quality in one product category often successfully extend into unrelated markets. Consumers assume that a company that makes excellent smartphones will also produce superior laptops or headphones, even though these require different expertise and manufacturing processes. Workplace evaluations frequently demonstrate this bias. Employees who perform exceptionally well in visible projects may receive inflated ratings in all performance areas. Conversely, one significant mistake can create a negative halo that unfairly diminishes evaluations of unrelated work quality and contributions. The bias also operates in reverse as the devil effect or horn effect. When we form negative impressions of someone or something, we tend to evaluate all their other qualities more harshly. A single weakness or failure can cast a shadow over otherwise positive attributes and achievements. First impressions gain particular power through the halo effect. The initial characteristics we notice about someone create lasting frameworks for interpreting all subsequent information. People who make strong positive first impressions benefit from halos that make their future mistakes seem less serious and their successes appear more significant. Social media amplifies halo effects through curated presentations of lifestyle and success. Followers often assume that people who appear wealthy or attractive online must also be happy, intelligent, and successful in all life areas. These impressions form based on limited, carefully selected information rather than complete pictures of reality. Understanding the halo effect helps improve decision-making by encouraging more analytical evaluation processes. Recognizing when positive or negative impressions might be influencing unrelated judgments allows for more objective assessment of specific qualities and capabilities. Professional settings can implement strategies to minimize halo bias in hiring and evaluation processes. Using structured interviews that evaluate different competencies separately helps prevent overall impressions from skewing assessments of specific skills. Anonymous evaluation systems can also reduce the influence of irrelevant positive or negative characteristics. The key to managing halo effects lies in deliberate efforts to evaluate different attributes independently. Taking time to consider evidence for each specific quality rather than generalizing from overall impressions leads to more accurate and fair assessments of people, products, and situations. Ben Franklin Effect. Ben Franklin Effect is a psychological phenomenon where doing a favor for someone actually makes you like them more, rather than less. This counterintuitive effect occurs because our minds work to resolve the cognitive dissonance created when we help someone we do not particularly care about, leading us to rationalize our helpful behavior by deciding we must like the person after all. The effect gets its name from Benjamin Franklin's account of winning over a political rival by asking to borrow a rare book from the man's library. After the rival lent him the book, their relationship improved significantly. Franklin understood that asking for the favor, rather than doing one for his opponent, would create the psychological shift needed to change their dynamic. Cognitive dissonance drives this phenomenon. When we perform helpful actions for others, especially people we feel neutral or negative toward, our minds experience uncomfortable tension between our behavior and our feelings. To resolve this mental conflict, we unconsciously adjust our attitudes to match our actions, convincing ourselves that we helped because we actually like the person. The brain seeks consistency between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. When these elements conflict, we naturally work to bring them into alignment. Since we cannot undo helpful actions we have already performed, the easiest resolution involves changing our emotional attitude toward the person we helped. This effect works because asking for favors creates a sense of trust and vulnerability. When someone agrees to help us, we interpret their willingness as a sign of goodwill and connection. The person doing the favor experiences a similar shift, as their helpful behavior signals to their own mind that they must care about our well-being. Workplace relationships often demonstrate the Ben Franklin effect in action. Colleagues who initially have neutral or slightly negative relationships may find their attitudes improving after one asks the other for assistance with a project. The act of helping creates psychological investment that translates into increased liking and cooperation. Sales professionals sometimes employ this technique by asking potential customers for small favors before making their pitch. They might ask for directions, opinions about products, or brief consultations. These minor requests create psychological investment that makes customers more receptive to subsequent sales approaches. The effect appears in social situations when people ask acquaintances for advice or assistance. Someone who asks a neighbor to recommend a restaurant or help with a small task often finds that the relationship becomes warmer and more friendly afterward. The person who provided help develops increased positive feelings toward the advice seeker. Dating contexts showcase this phenomenon when people ask romantic interests for small favors or assistance. Rather than always trying to impress through their own helpfulness, successful daters sometimes create connection by allowing others to be helpful to them. This approach builds investment and positive feelings from the person providing assistance. However, the Ben Franklin effect requires careful application to avoid exploitation or manipulation. The requests must be reasonable and genuinely appreciated. Asking for excessive favors or failing to show gratitude can backfire and damage relationships rather than improve them. The size and nature of the requested favor matters significantly. Small to moderate requests work best, as they create investment without causing resentment. Very large favors may create negative feelings if people feel taken advantage of, while tiny favors may not generate enough psychological investment to shift attitudes meaningfully. Timing influences the effect's success as well. Asking for favors too early in relationships can seem presumptuous, while waiting too long may miss opportunities to build connection. The best applications occur when some basic rapport already exists but the relationship could benefit from deeper investment. Understanding the Ben Franklin effect helps build stronger personal and professional relationships. Rather than always trying to win people over through our own helpfulness, we can create connection by thoughtfully allowing others to invest in us through small acts of assistance. The effect highlights how our behaviors influence our feelings more than we typically realize. By paying attention to this dynamic, we can make more intentional choices about how we interact with others and build the relationships we want to develop. Scarcity Principle. Scarcity principle is a psychological phenomenon where people assign higher value to items, opportunities, or experiences that are perceived as rare, limited, or difficult to obtain. This mental bias causes us to want things more intensely when we believe they are scarce, even when the actual utility or quality of the item remains unchanged. The principle operates through our evolutionary programming that associates scarcity with value and importance. Throughout human history, resources that were hard to find or obtain were typically more valuable for survival. Our brains developed automatic responses that increase desire and motivation when we perceive limited availability, even in modern contexts where scarcity may be artificial or irrelevant. Loss aversion amplifies the scarcity effect significantly. The fear of missing out on something that might not be available later creates stronger motivation than the simple desire to gain something abundant. When we perceive that an opportunity might disappear, we experience psychological urgency that can override careful decision-making processes. Marketing campaigns exploit scarcity principles extensively through limited time offers, exclusive memberships, and countdown timers. Phrases like "while supplies last," "limited edition," or "only 3 left in stock" trigger scarcity responses that increase purchase motivation. These tactics work even when consumers rationally understand the artificial nature of the limitations. Retail environments use scarcity through flash sales and seasonal availability. Black Friday shopping frenzies demonstrate how artificial time constraints and limited quantities can drive intense consumer behavior. People will wait in long lines and compete aggressively for deals they might not have wanted under normal circumstances. Social contexts showcase scarcity through exclusivity and selective access. Private clubs, invitation-only events, and VIP experiences gain appeal partly through their restricted availability. The difficulty of gaining access makes membership or participation feel more valuable and desirable than openly available alternatives. Dating relationships often involve scarcity dynamics where playing hard to get can increase romantic interest. When someone appears busy, selective, or difficult to pin down, they may seem more attractive than equally appealing people who are readily available. The challenge of winning their attention creates additional psychological investment. Professional opportunities demonstrate scarcity effects through competitive selection processes. Job positions, college admissions, and business partnerships become more desirable when many people compete for limited spots. The selection process itself adds perceived value beyond the actual benefits of the opportunity. Digital products and services create artificial scarcity through beta access, waiting lists, and limited releases. Social media platforms and apps often generate buzz by restricting early access to select users. This exclusivity creates demand that might not exist if the product were immediately available to everyone. However, scarcity can backfire when perceived as manipulative or when the restrictions feel arbitrary. Consumers who recognize artificial scarcity tactics may react negatively, feeling that companies are trying to pressure them into hasty decisions. Transparency about genuine limitations works better than manufactured urgency. The principle affects decision-making quality by creating time pressure that reduces careful evaluation. When we believe something scarce might disappear, we may skip important research or consideration steps. This urgency can lead to purchases or commitments that do not actually serve our best interests. Cultural factors influence how scarcity is perceived and valued. Societies that emphasize status and competition may respond more strongly to exclusive offerings, while cultures that value equality and accessibility might view artificial scarcity more skeptically. Understanding the scarcity principle helps consumers make more rational decisions by recognizing when limited availability is genuine versus artificially created. Taking time to evaluate whether scarcity actually affects the value or utility of something allows for better choices that align with real needs and preferences. The principle also explains why abundant resources are often undervalued or wasted. When something is readily available, we may not appreciate its true worth or take proper care of it. Recognizing this tendency can help us better value and conserve the resources we do have access to. Framing effect. Framing effect is a cognitive bias where people make different decisions based on how information is presented, even when the underlying facts remain identical. This psychological phenomenon demonstrates that the context, wording, or perspective used to describe options can dramatically influence our choices, often leading to inconsistent decision-making patterns. The effect occurs because our minds process information relative to reference points rather than in absolute terms. When presented with options framed as gains, we tend to be more risk-averse and prefer certain outcomes. Conversely, when the same options are framed as losses, we become more willing to take risks to avoid those losses, even when the mathematical probabilities remain unchanged. Medical scenarios frequently illustrate the framing effect in action. Patients told that a surgery has a 90% survival rate respond more positively than those told it has a 10% mortality rate, despite these statements being mathematically equivalent. The positive framing of survival creates different emotional responses and decision patterns than the negative framing of death. Marketing professionals expertly manipulate framing to influence consumer behavior. Ground beef labeled as 80% lean sells better than identical meat labeled as 20% fat. Credit card companies describe cash payments as receiving discounts rather than framing card payments as surcharges, making electronic payment feel like the normal option rather than an additional cost. Financial decision-making shows strong framing effects through gain and loss presentations. Investment opportunities described in terms of potential gains attract different responses than identical options presented as avoiding losses. People may reject a sure gain while accepting a risky gamble to avoid certain losses, violating traditional economic theories about rational decision-making. Political communication relies heavily on framing to shape public opinion. The same policy might be described as tax relief by supporters or revenue reduction by opponents. Social programs can be framed as investments in citizens or government spending, creating vastly different emotional responses to identical initiatives. Employment contexts demonstrate framing through job descriptions and benefit presentations. A position with flexible scheduling sounds more appealing than one requiring irregular hours, even when the actual work demands are the same. Salary negotiations involve framing compensation packages in terms of total value versus individual components. Educational environments show framing effects in how information is taught and tested. Students respond differently to exam feedback framed as points earned versus points lost. Course descriptions emphasizing learning opportunities versus academic requirements attract different student attitudes and engagement levels. The effect influences personal relationships through communication patterns. Describing someone's behavior as thorough versus slow frames the same trait differently. Relationship conflicts can escalate or de-escalate based on whether issues are framed as personal attacks or situational challenges requiring mutual problem solving. News media demonstrates powerful framing effects through story selection and presentation. The same event can be portrayed as a success story or cautionary tale depending on which aspects receive emphasis. Headlines, images, and context all contribute to framing that shapes public perception before people encounter detailed information. Understanding the framing effect helps improve decision-making by encouraging multiple perspective consideration. When facing important choices, deliberately reframing options in different ways can reveal whether our preferences remain consistent or shift based on presentation. This awareness helps identify more stable, value-based decisions. Professional environments can use positive framing ethically to improve outcomes. Teachers framing challenges as learning opportunities rather than obstacles may increase student motivation. Managers describing changes as growth opportunities rather than disruptions can reduce resistance and increase adaptation. However, awareness of framing also requires vigilance against manipulation. Recognizing when others use framing to influence our decisions allows us to seek additional perspectives and focus on underlying facts rather than presentation styles. Critical thinking involves looking beyond surface framing to understand actual implications and alternatives. The key to managing framing effects lies in developing habits of reframing important decisions from multiple angles before committing to choices. This practice helps ensure that our decisions reflect our genuine values and preferences rather than the arbitrary way information was initially presented to us. Baader-Meinhof. Baader-Meinhof is a psychological phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion, where something you recently learned about or noticed suddenly seems to appear everywhere. This cognitive bias creates the false impression that a word, concept, or object has become more common in your environment when in reality, your brain has simply become more attuned to recognizing it. The effect occurs through a combination of selective attention and confirmation bias working together. Once something captures your conscious awareness, your brain begins filtering information differently. Your mind starts noticing instances of this thing that were always present but previously ignored or overlooked. The heightened awareness makes these occurrences feel more frequent and significant than they actually are. Selective attention plays the primary role in this phenomenon. Our brains constantly receive enormous amounts of sensory information every second. To prevent cognitive overload, we automatically filter out most details that seem irrelevant to our current interests or concerns. However, once something becomes relevant or interesting, our attention system flags it as important information worth noticing. The name comes from a specific example involving the German terrorist group Baader-Meinhof. Someone first learned about this group and then began noticing references to it in various media sources. This personal experience of sudden increased awareness led to the phenomenon being named after the group, even though the psychological mechanism applies to countless different subjects. Everyday examples of Baader-Meinhof happen constantly in our lives. You learn a new word and suddenly hear it in conversations, see it in articles, and encounter it in social media posts. You consider buying a particular car model and then notice that same car everywhere on the roads. You discover a new band and start hearing their songs playing in stores and restaurants. Pregnancy announcements often trigger this effect powerfully. Once someone becomes pregnant or starts thinking about having children, they begin noticing pregnant women, baby strollers, and child-related products everywhere. The awareness creates an illusion that pregnancy and babies have suddenly become more prevalent in their environment. Technology and social media amplify the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon significantly. Algorithm-driven content delivery systems notice your engagement with certain topics and begin showing you more related content. This creates an artificial increase in exposure that reinforces the illusion of increased frequency beyond what natural selective attention would create. The effect can influence decision-making processes in both positive and negative ways. When researching purchases or major life decisions, The increased attention to relevant information can provide valuable insights and options you might have missed otherwise. However, it can also create false impressions about trends, risks, or opportunities that are not actually changing in frequency. Marketing professionals understand and sometimes exploit this phenomenon. Advertising campaigns aim to achieve initial awareness that triggers selective attention, making their brand or product seem more prevalent and popular than competitors. Once consumers notice a brand, they begin seeing it more frequently, which can influence purchasing decisions. Understanding Baader-Meinhof helps maintain perspective during research and decision-making processes. Recognizing when this bias might be operating allows you to seek more objective data about actual frequency and prevalence rather than relying on subjective impressions of increased occurrence. The phenomenon highlights how much our perception of reality depends on the current focus of our attention rather than objective measures of what exists in our environment. Horn Effect. Horn Effect is a cognitive bias where a negative impression of one characteristic leads to unfavorable judgments about all other qualities of a person, product, or situation. This psychological phenomenon represents the opposite of the halo effect, creating a metaphorical set of devil's horns that makes everything appear worse than objective evaluation would suggest. The bias operates through negative generalization, where our minds automatically assume that weakness or failure in one area indicates similar deficiencies across all areas. When we perceive someone as unattractive, unsuccessful, or disagreeable in one aspect, we unconsciously attribute other negative qualities to them such as incompetence, dishonesty, or poor character, even without evidence for these additional flaws. Single negative incidents can trigger horn effects that persist long after the original problem. An employee who makes one significant mistake may find that all their subsequent work receives harsher scrutiny and lower ratings. The negative impression from the initial error creates a lens through which all future performance gets evaluated more critically than it deserves. Physical appearance often triggers horn effects just as powerfully as it creates halo effects. People perceived as unattractive, poorly dressed, or physically different may be judged as less intelligent, less capable, or less trustworthy. These negative assumptions occur despite no logical connection between appearance and these other qualities. Educational settings demonstrate horn effects when teachers form negative impressions of students early in the academic year. A student who struggles in one subject or displays behavioral problems might receive lower expectations and grades across all areas of study. The initial negative impression influences how teachers interpret the student's efforts and capabilities in unrelated subjects. Corporate environments showcase horn effects through brand reputation damage. Companies that experience one major scandal or product failure often see negative perceptions spread to all their offerings. Consumers assume that a company with one problematic product must have quality issues across their entire product line, even when other products maintain high standards. Job interviews frequently demonstrate this bias when candidates make poor first impressions. Someone who arrives late, dresses inappropriately, or gives one weak answer may find that interviewers rate all their other responses more negatively. The initial negative impression creates a framework that makes subsequent information seem less impressive or credible. Social media amplifies horn effects through viral negative content and cancel culture dynamics. One controversial statement or inappropriate action can lead to complete character assassination, where all aspects of someone's life and work get reinterpreted through a negative lens. Past achievements and positive qualities become overshadowed by single incidents. The bias affects personal relationships when conflicts or disappointments create lasting negative impressions. Partners who have one major disagreement might begin viewing all their relationship dynamics more critically. Friends who experience one betrayal may start questioning all previous interactions and shared experiences. Criminal justice systems show horn effects through how prior convictions influence current case evaluations. Defendants with criminal histories may face harsher judgments not only for their past actions but also in how current charges and evidence get interpreted. The negative history creates presumptions that affect supposedly objective legal proceedings. Understanding horn effects helps create more fair and accurate evaluation processes. Recognizing when negative impressions might be influencing unrelated judgments allows for more objective assessment of specific qualities and situations. This awareness is particularly important in professional settings where fair evaluation affects careers and opportunities. Strategies for minimizing horn effects include structured evaluation systems that assess different competencies separately. Anonymous review processes can help reduce the influence of negative characteristics that are irrelevant to the qualities being measured. Taking time between negative incidents and comprehensive evaluations can also help prevent temporary impressions from creating lasting bias. The key to managing horn effects lies in deliberate efforts to evaluate different attributes independently and to question whether negative impressions in one area actually provide evidence about performance in other areas. This conscious approach leads to more balanced and fair assessments. Paradox of choice. Paradox of choice is a psychological phenomenon where having too many options actually decreases satisfaction and decision-making ability rather than improving it. This counterintuitive effect demonstrates that while some choice is essential for well-being and autonomy, excessive options can create anxiety, paralysis, and regret that undermine the benefits we expect from having multiple alternatives. The paradox occurs because our cognitive resources for evaluating options are limited. When faced with dozens or hundreds of choices, our minds become overwhelmed by the comparison process. We struggle to weigh all the different features, benefits, and trade-offs involved in making optimal decisions. This mental overload can lead to decision avoidance, where we postpone or abandon choices altogether rather than work through complex comparisons. Analysis paralysis represents one major manifestation of this paradox. Consumers standing in grocery aisles faced with 40 different breakfast cereals may find themselves unable to choose any option. The abundance of alternatives creates pressure to find the perfect choice, but the evaluation process becomes so overwhelming that decision-making shuts down completely. Opportunity cost awareness intensifies as choice sets expand. With few options, we can easily imagine what we are giving up by choosing one alternative over another. However, with many options, we become acutely aware of all the potential benefits we are sacrificing. This heightened awareness of missed opportunities can make any chosen option feel inadequate or disappointing. Post-decision regret increases significantly when many alternatives exist. After choosing from a small set of options, we typically feel satisfied with our selection. But when we choose from extensive menus of possibilities, we often wonder whether a different choice might have been better. The knowledge that many other options existed creates ongoing doubt about our decision quality. Dating applications and online platforms exemplify the paradox of choice in modern relationships. Users with access to thousands of potential partners often struggle to commit to any single relationship. The awareness of countless alternatives can prevent deep investment in current connections and create unrealistic expectations about finding perfect matches. Retirement planning demonstrates this paradox through overwhelming investment options. Employees offered dozens of mutual fund choices in their retirement plans often delay enrollment or make poor selections. Companies that reduce options to a manageable number typically see higher participation rates and better long-term outcomes for their employees. Consumer markets exploit and suffer from choice proliferation simultaneously. Retailers expand product lines thinking more options attract customers, but excessive variety can overwhelm shoppers and reduce sales. Studies show that customers buy more jam when offered 6 flavors compared to 24 flavors, despite initially showing more interest in the larger selection. Educational contexts showcase this paradox through course selection and career planning. Students with unlimited elective options may struggle more with academic planning than those with structured programs. The pressure to optimize educational choices from vast possibilities can create anxiety and delay important decisions about academic and professional directions. Technology amplifies the paradox of choice through infinite digital options. Streaming services with thousands of movies and shows often leave viewers scrolling endlessly without watching anything. Social media provides unlimited content streams that can create anxiety about missing important information or experiences. Understanding this paradox helps improve decision-making strategies and system design. Recognizing when choice overload might be occurring allows for more structured approaches to evaluation. Creating personal rules or criteria before encountering large choice sets can streamline the decision process and reduce cognitive burden. Satisficing rather than maximizing represents one effective response to choice abundance. Instead of seeking the absolute best option from all possibilities, focus on finding the first alternative that meets your essential criteria. This approach reduces evaluation time and increases satisfaction with chosen options. The key to managing the paradox of choice involves finding the optimal balance between having enough options to feel autonomous while avoiding overwhelming complexity. This might mean deliberately limiting consideration sets or using filtering criteria to reduce choices to manageable numbers before detailed evaluation begins. Decoy Effect. Decoy Effect is a marketing and psychological phenomenon where consumers change their preference between two options when a third, strategically inferior option is introduced. This additional choice, called the decoy, is designed to make one of the original options appear significantly more attractive by comparison, even though the decoy itself is not meant to be chosen. The effect works by manipulating relative comparisons rather than absolute value assessments. When people evaluate options, they do not consider each choice in isolation. Instead, they compare alternatives against each other to determine which offers the best value. The decoy is carefully positioned to be obviously inferior to the target option while being only slightly better or worse than the competitor. Movie theater concession stands demonstrate this effect clearly through their pricing structures. A small popcorn might cost $4, while a large costs $6.50. When theaters add a medium option for $6, the large suddenly appears to be an excellent deal. The medium serves as a decoy that makes the large seem like better value, even though customers rarely choose the medium. Subscription services employ decoy pricing extensively to guide customers toward premium plans. A basic plan might offer limited features for $10 monthly. A premium plan with extensive features costs $30. Adding a standard plan for $25 with only slightly more features than basic makes the premium option seem reasonable by comparison. The effect influences purchasing decisions by creating asymmetric dominance relationships. The target option dominates the decoy in all or most important dimensions, while the relationship between target and competitor remains more ambiguous. This asymmetry makes the target choice feel obviously superior without requiring complex trade-off evaluations. Restaurant menus use decoy effects through strategic wine and entree pricing. An expensive wine or dish serves as an anchor that makes moderately priced options seem reasonable. Customers who would never order the expensive decoy item still have their price expectations influenced by their presence on the menu. Real estate agents apply this principle when showing properties to potential buyers. They might show an overpriced or poorly maintained property first, making subsequent reasonably priced homes seem like excellent values. The inferior property serves as a decoy that enhances the appeal of the agent's preferred listings. Technology companies structure product lines using decoy effects to drive sales toward high-margin items. A basic smartphone model and premium model might be joined by a mid-range option that offers only slightly better features than basic for nearly the same price as premium. This positioning makes the premium model appear to offer exceptional value. The decoy effect requires careful calibration to work effectively. The decoy must be obviously inferior to the target but not so ridiculous that consumers recognize the manipulation. It should share enough characteristics with other options to seem like a legitimate choice while being clearly dominated by the preferred alternative. Understanding the decoy effect helps consumers make more rational purchasing decisions by recognizing when additional options are included specifically to influence choice rather than provide genuine value. Focusing on your actual needs and budget rather than relative comparisons can help avoid manipulation through strategic option positioning. The effect reveals how context-dependent human decision-making actually is, despite our belief that we evaluate options objectively. Our preferences can shift dramatically based on what alternatives are available for comparison, even when those alternatives are not seriously considered. Dunning-Kruger Effect. Dunning-Kruger Effect is a cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge or competence in a particular area greatly overestimate their own knowledge or ability in that domain. This psychological phenomenon occurs because the same skills needed to be competent in a field are also required to recognize competence, creating a blind spot where inexperienced individuals cannot accurately assess their own limitations. The effect emerges from metacognitive deficits, which means lacking awareness about one's own cognitive processes and knowledge gaps. When someone knows very little about a subject, they also lack the expertise necessary to recognize what they do not know. This creates a dangerous combination of confidence and incompetence that can lead to poor decisions and overreach. Beginner's confidence exemplifies this bias perfectly. Someone who takes a few guitar lessons might believe they are ready to perform publicly, while truly skilled musicians understand how much more they need to learn. The novice lacks the experience to recognize the complexity and nuance that expertise requires, leading to inflated self-assessment. Social media platforms amplify the Dunning-Kruger effect by giving everyone a voice on complex topics. People who read a few articles about economics, medicine, or politics often feel qualified to debate experts in those fields. The ease of accessing information creates an illusion of understanding that does not reflect actual competence or deep knowledge. The effect appears strongly in driving abilities, where most people rate themselves as above average drivers despite statistical impossibility. New drivers often display more confidence than experienced ones because they have not yet encountered enough challenging situations to understand their limitations. Experience teaches humility that inexperience cannot provide. Workplace environments frequently showcase this bias when employees in new positions overestimate their readiness for advanced responsibilities. Someone promoted to management might assume leadership skills transfer automatically from technical competence, not recognizing the different skill sets required for effective people management. Academic settings demonstrate the effect through student self-assessments that consistently overrate performance compared to actual test results. Students who understand basic concepts often believe they have mastered entire subjects, while advanced students become more aware of knowledge gaps and rate themselves more conservatively. The inverse relationship between confidence and competence creates a paradoxical situation where the least qualified individuals express the most certainty about their abilities. Meanwhile, truly competent people often underestimate their skills because they assume others possess similar knowledge levels and because they are more aware of what they still need to learn. Investment and financial planning showcase dangerous applications of this effect. Novice investors who experience early success may believe they have discovered superior strategies, leading to overconfident trading that ultimately destroys wealth. The complexity of financial markets requires expertise that casual investors typically underestimate. Medical and health decisions suffer from Dunning-Kruger effects when people with limited medical knowledge challenge professional diagnoses or treatment recommendations. Internet research can provide information but cannot substitute for years of medical training and clinical experience in interpreting symptoms and treatment options. The effect diminishes as actual competence increases and people gain realistic understanding of skill requirements. True experts typically demonstrate appropriate humility about their knowledge boundaries while maintaining confidence in their areas of genuine expertise. They understand both what they know and what they do not know. Recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect in ourselves requires active effort to seek feedback, question our assumptions, and acknowledge knowledge limitations. Before making important decisions in unfamiliar areas, consulting with genuine experts helps compensate for our inability to accurately assess our own competence levels. Educational approaches that emphasize critical thinking and metacognitive awareness can help reduce this bias. Learning to question our own knowledge and seek evidence for our beliefs creates habits that counteract the overconfidence that limited knowledge tends to produce. False consensus effect. False consensus effect is a cognitive bias where people overestimate how much others share their beliefs, values, opinions, and behaviors. This psychological phenomenon leads individuals to assume that their own thoughts and actions are more common and normal than they actually are, creating an illusion of widespread agreement that does not reflect reality. The effect occurs because we use ourselves as a reference point for understanding others. Our own experiences, preferences, and viewpoints feel natural and reasonable to us, so we assume that other rational people would naturally arrive at similar conclusions. This self-centered perspective makes it difficult to recognize how much our personal backgrounds and circumstances influence our thinking. Social circles contribute significantly to this bias by surrounding us with people who often share similar characteristics, experiences, and viewpoints. When most people in our immediate environment agree with us, this reinforces the impression that our opinions represent mainstream thinking. We forget that our social networks are not random samples of the broader population. Political beliefs demonstrate the false consensus effect powerfully during election seasons. People often express shock when their preferred candidates lose, believing that everyone they know supports the same positions. They assume their political bubble represents the general population, leading to genuine surprise when voting results reveal different preferences exist widely. Consumer preferences showcase this bias in product development and marketing decisions. Business owners may assume that products appealing to them will automatically appeal to their target markets. They project their own tastes and needs onto potential customers without adequately researching whether those preferences are actually shared by their audience. Lifestyle choices reveal false consensus when people assume others share their habits and priorities. Someone who exercises regularly might overestimate how many people maintain active lifestyles. Parents might assume other families share their approaches to child rearing, not recognizing the diversity of parenting philosophies and practices. The effect influences moral and ethical judgments as well. People tend to believe their ethical standards represent common decency rather than personal values that others might not share. This can lead to harsh judgments of those who make different choices, assuming they are deliberately violating widely accepted norms. Technology usage patterns show false consensus when early adopters assume new platforms or devices will obviously appeal to everyone. They cannot understand why others do not immediately embrace innovations that seem clearly beneficial, not recognizing that different people have different comfort levels and needs regarding technology. Educational and professional environments demonstrate this bias when teachers or managers assume their communication styles and expectations align with what students or employees naturally prefer. They may not realize that their approaches work well for some people but create difficulties for others with different learning or working styles. Dating and relationship contexts showcase false consensus through assumptions about romantic preferences and relationship goals. Someone seeking serious commitment might assume most people their age share that priority, not recognizing that others may prefer casual dating or have different relationship timelines and expectations. The bias can create problems in group decision-making when leaders assume consensus exists without actually checking with team members. They may interpret silence or politeness as agreement when people actually hold different views but hesitate to express dissenting opinions. Understanding the false consensus effect helps improve empathy and communication by reminding us to actively seek out diverse perspectives rather than assuming others think like we do. This awareness encourages more inclusive decision-making and reduces the tendency to dismiss different viewpoints as unreasonable or abnormal. Strategies for countering this bias include deliberately seeking feedback from people with different backgrounds and experiences. Conducting surveys or research before making assumptions about others' preferences helps create more accurate understanding of actual consensus levels rather than projected consensus. The key to managing false consensus lies in developing curiosity about how others think and experience the world differently from ourselves, recognizing that our own perspectives represent just one point in a much broader spectrum of human experience and opinion. Just world hypothesis. Just world hypothesis is a cognitive bias where people believe that the world is fundamentally fair and that individuals generally get what they deserve. This psychological phenomenon leads us to assume that good things happen to good people while bad things happen to bad people, creating a mental framework that helps maintain a sense of order and predictability in an often chaotic world. The hypothesis serves important psychological functions by providing comfort and security in the face of uncertainty. Believing that actions lead to appropriate consequences helps people feel that they have control over their own destinies. If the world operates fairly, then making good choices and working hard should lead to positive outcomes while avoiding bad behavior should prevent negative consequences. Victim blaming represents one of the most troubling manifestations of this bias. When bad things happen to others, people often search for reasons why the victims might have caused or deserved their misfortune. This allows observers to maintain their belief in fairness while distancing themselves from the possibility that similar bad things could happen to them randomly. Crime victims frequently face questions about their behavior that imply partial responsibility for their victimization. People ask what someone was wearing, where they were walking, or what precautions they failed to take. These questions reflect the uncomfortable truth that random violence challenges our belief that the world operates according to fair principles. Economic inequality gets rationalized through just world thinking when people assume that wealthy individuals must have worked harder or made better choices than those struggling financially. This perspective overlooks systemic advantages, inherited wealth, and random opportunities that significantly influence economic outcomes regardless of personal merit or effort. Health outcomes trigger just world reasoning when people assume that illness results from poor lifestyle choices or moral failings. While behavior does influence health, this thinking ignores genetic factors, environmental conditions, and access to healthcare that play major roles in determining who gets sick and who stays healthy. The bias affects how we interpret our own experiences as well as others' situations. When good things happen to us, we often attribute them to our own merit and hard work. When bad things occur, we may search for lessons or meaning that help us believe we can prevent similar problems in the future through better choices. Religious and spiritual frameworks sometimes reinforce just world thinking through concepts like karma or divine justice. These belief systems can provide comfort and moral guidance, but they may also lead to harsh judgments of those experiencing difficulties, assuming their suffering reflects spiritual or moral shortcomings. Legal systems both reflect and challenge just world assumptions. Courts attempt to ensure that punishment fits crimes and that justice prevails, supporting the idea that wrongdoers receive appropriate consequences. However, legal professionals understand that outcomes often depend on factors beyond individual merit, including quality of representation and systemic biases. Understanding the just world hypothesis helps develop more compassionate and realistic perspectives on human suffering and success. Recognizing this bias allows us to support others without assuming they caused their problems or that we are immune to similar difficulties through our own good behavior. The key to managing just world thinking involves accepting that life contains significant elements of randomness and unfairness while still maintaining personal responsibility and hope. This balanced perspective allows for both empathy toward others and motivation for positive action without the harmful judgments that pure just world thinking creates. Bystander Effect. Bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to offer help to someone in need when other people are present. This counterintuitive effect demonstrates that the presence of others can actually reduce the likelihood of receiving assistance during emergencies or difficult situations, contrary to the common assumption that more witnesses mean more potential help. The effect occurs through several psychological mechanisms working together to inhibit helping behavior. Diffusion of responsibility represents the primary factor, where individuals feel less personal obligation to act when others are present. Each person assumes that someone else will take responsibility for helping, leading to a situation where nobody actually steps forward to assist. Pluralistic ignorance contributes significantly to this phenomenon. When people are unsure whether a situation actually requires intervention, they look to others for cues about appropriate responses. If everyone appears calm and uninvolved, individuals interpret this as evidence that help is not needed, even when everyone is actually uncertain and looking for the same social cues. Social evaluation concerns also inhibit helping behavior in group settings. People worry about appearing foolish or overreacting if they misinterpret a situation. The fear of embarrassment or social judgment can prevent intervention even when someone genuinely wants to help. This concern becomes stronger as the number of observers increases. Famous cases like the murder of Kitty Genovese initially brought attention to the bystander effect, though later investigations revealed that the original reports exaggerated the number of witnesses and their inaction. Nevertheless, extensive research has confirmed that the basic phenomenon occurs regularly in various contexts and situations. Emergency situations showcase the effect most dramatically. People having medical crises in crowded public spaces may receive less immediate assistance than those who collapse when only one or two people are present. The single witness feels clear responsibility to act, while crowd members may hesitate and look to others for guidance. Bullying scenarios demonstrate the bystander effect in educational and workplace environments. Students or colleagues who witness harassment often fail to intervene, each assuming others will speak up or that the situation does not require their involvement. This collective inaction allows harmful behavior to continue unchallenged. Online environments amplify bystander effects through social media and digital platforms. People may witness cyberbullying, harassment, or requests for help but assume others will respond. The psychological distance created by digital interaction can further reduce feelings of personal responsibility to intervene or assist. Urban environments show this effect through decreased helping behavior in crowded cities compared to smaller communities. City dwellers encountering someone who needs assistance may assume others are better positioned to help or that professional services will handle the situation, leading to reduced individual intervention rates. The effect varies based on relationship factors and situational characteristics. People are more likely to help friends or family members regardless of other observers. Clear, unambiguous emergencies that obviously require assistance can overcome bystander effects more easily than ambiguous situations where the need for help is unclear. Understanding the bystander effect helps individuals overcome the psychological barriers to helping others. Recognizing these tendencies allows people to consciously choose action rather than falling into passive observer roles. Direct requests for help from specific individuals can also counteract diffusion of responsibility. Training programs for emergency response often address bystander effects by teaching people to take leadership roles in crisis situations. Learning to make direct eye contact with specific individuals and give clear instructions helps overcome the paralysis that group settings can create during emergencies. The key to combating the bystander effect lies in personal awareness and deliberate decision-making about when to intervene. Taking individual responsibility rather than assuming others will act helps ensure that people in need receive the assistance they require regardless of how many other potential helpers are present. Social proof. Social proof is a psychological phenomenon where people determine appropriate behavior by observing what others are doing, especially in uncertain or ambiguous situations. This mental shortcut assumes that if many people are engaging in a particular behavior, it must be correct, appropriate, or beneficial, leading individuals to conform to group actions rather than making independent decisions. The principle operates through our evolutionary tendency to survive by following group behavior. Throughout human history, conforming to group norms often meant safety and acceptance, while deviating from collective behavior could result in danger or social rejection. Our brains developed automatic responses that encourage us to match the actions of those around us, particularly when we feel uncertain about proper behavior. Uncertainty amplifies social proof effects significantly. When people feel confident about appropriate actions, they rely less on others' behavior for guidance. However, in new, complex, or ambiguous situations, observing others becomes the primary method for determining correct responses. This makes social proof particularly powerful during emergencies, social gatherings, or unfamiliar environments. Marketing campaigns exploit social proof extensively through testimonials, user reviews, and popularity indicators. Phrases like best-selling, most popular choice, or thousands of satisfied customers trigger social proof responses that make products seem more desirable. Customer reviews and rating systems tap into our tendency to trust collective judgment over individual assessment. Restaurant success often depends on social proof dynamics. Empty restaurants struggle to attract customers because the lack of diners suggests poor quality or service. Conversely, restaurants with visible crowds draw additional customers who assume the popularity indicates good food. This creates positive or negative feedback loops that can make or break businesses. Social media platforms design features specifically to leverage social proof through likes, shares, follower counts, and trending indicators. Content with high engagement numbers attracts more attention and interaction because users assume popular content must be valuable or entertaining. These metrics influence both content creators and consumers' behavior patterns. Fashion and lifestyle choices demonstrate social proof through trend adoption and peer influence. People often choose clothing, hairstyles, or activities based on what they observe others doing rather than personal preference. The desire to fit in and avoid standing out drives conformity to group standards and popular choices. Investment bubbles showcase dangerous applications of social proof when people make financial decisions based on others' actions rather than fundamental analysis. The assumption that widespread investment activity indicates good opportunities leads to herd behavior that can inflate asset prices beyond reasonable values before inevitable corrections occur. Emergency situations reveal both helpful and harmful aspects of social proof. In genuine crises, seeing others evacuate or take protective action can prompt appropriate responses from those who might otherwise remain frozen. However, if initial observers fail to react appropriately, their inaction can influence others to also remain passive when action is needed. Cultural differences affect how social proof operates across different societies. Individualistic cultures may show less susceptibility to social proof compared to collectivistic societies that emphasize group harmony and consensus. However, all humans demonstrate some degree of social proof influence regardless of cultural background. Online behavior shows strong social proof effects through viral content, viral challenges, and mass participation in digital trends. People share, comment, or participate in online activities partly because they see others doing the same, creating cascading effects that can spread information or behaviors rapidly across networks. Understanding social proof helps make more independent decisions by recognizing when group behavior might be influencing our choices inappropriately. This awareness allows for more thoughtful evaluation of whether following others serves our genuine interests or simply reflects automatic conformity responses. The key to managing social proof lies in developing the ability to distinguish between situations where following group behavior makes sense versus times when independent thinking and action are more appropriate for achieving personal goals and values. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a psychological phenomenon where a belief or expectation about a future event actually causes that event to occur through the actions and behaviors it influences. This process demonstrates how our predictions about ourselves, others, Or situations can become reality not because they were accurate initially, but because believing them changes how we act in ways that make them come true. The mechanism works through unconscious behavioral changes that align with our expectations. When we believe something will happen, we automatically adjust our actions, attention, and responses in ways that increase the likelihood of that outcome. These subtle changes in behavior often go unnoticed, making the eventual result seem like confirmation of an accurate prediction rather than a consequence of our own actions. Educational settings showcase this effect powerfully through teacher expectations and student performance. When teachers believe certain students are highly capable, they unconsciously provide more attention, encouragement, and challenging opportunities to those students. This differential treatment helps the expected high performers actually achieve better results, confirming the teacher's initial belief while potentially limiting other students' potential. Workplace environments demonstrate self-fulfilling prophecies through management expectations about employee performance. Supervisors who expect certain team members to excel often provide them with better projects, more support, and increased responsibilities. This additional investment helps those employees develop skills and achieve success that validates the manager's original confidence in their abilities. Romantic relationships frequently involve self-fulfilling prophecies around trust, commitment, and compatibility. Someone who expects their partner to be unfaithful may become suspicious and controlling, creating tension that actually damages the relationship and potentially leads to the feared outcome. Conversely, expecting positive interactions can create behaviors that strengthen relationships. Health outcomes can be influenced by self-fulfilling prophecies through the placebo effect and patient expectations about recovery. People who believe they will heal quickly often engage in behaviors that promote healing, while those expecting poor outcomes may neglect self-care or experience stress that impedes recovery. Medical professionals' expectations can also influence treatment approaches and patient responses. Economic predictions sometimes become self-fulfilling when widespread belief in economic trends influences collective behavior. If many people expect a recession, they may reduce spending and investment, creating the economic slowdown they feared. Similarly, confidence in economic growth can encourage behaviors that actually stimulate economic activity. Sports psychology reveals self-fulfilling prophecies through athlete confidence and performance expectations. Athletes who believe they will perform well often prepare more thoroughly, maintain better focus, and persist through challenges. This mindset contributes to actual improved performance that confirms their positive expectations. Social stereotypes can create self-fulfilling prophecies when expectations about group behavior influence how individuals are treated and how they respond to that treatment. Negative stereotypes may lead to reduced opportunities and support, making it harder for individuals to succeed and potentially reinforcing the original stereotype. Understanding self-fulfilling prophecies helps create more positive outcomes by consciously choosing optimistic but realistic expectations. Recognizing how our beliefs influence our behaviors allows us to align our actions with our desired outcomes rather than our fears. The key to harnessing positive self-fulfilling prophecies involves setting achievable goals, maintaining confidence while remaining flexible about methods, and recognizing that our expectations shape our reality through the actions they inspire rather than through magical thinking. Contrast principle. Contrast principle is a psychological phenomenon where our perception of something is dramatically influenced by what we experience immediately before it. This cognitive bias demonstrates that we do not evaluate things in isolation but always in comparison to recent reference points, leading to judgments that can shift significantly based on the sequence of our experiences. The principle operates through our brain's tendency to use recent experiences as benchmarks for comparison. When we encounter something after experiencing its opposite or a more extreme version, our perception becomes skewed by that contrast. What might seem acceptable in isolation can appear wonderful or terrible depending on what preceded it. Temperature perception illustrates this effect clearly. Water that feels comfortably warm after being outside in freezing weather will feel cool or even cold after spending time in a hot sauna. The actual temperature remains constant, but our perception changes based on the contrasting reference point our body experienced previously. Retail environments exploit the contrast principle through strategic product presentation and pricing arrangements. Car dealerships show expensive luxury models first, making moderately priced vehicles seem like bargains afterward. Real estate agents use similar tactics by showing overpriced or poorly maintained properties before revealing the homes they actually want to sell. Restaurant experiences demonstrate this bias through tasting menus and wine pairings. A decent wine can taste exceptional when served after a poor one, while the same wine might seem mediocre following an excellent selection. Chefs understand how contrasting flavors enhance perception of subsequent dishes. Salary negotiations showcase the principle when initial offers establish reference points that influence all subsequent discussions. An extremely low first offer makes modest increases seem generous, while high opening offers create different expectations about final agreements. The contrast shapes perception of fairness and value throughout the negotiation process. Dating contexts reveal contrast effects when people evaluate potential partners after experiencing particularly positive or negative relationships. Someone might seem perfect following a difficult breakup, while the same person could appear lacking after an exceptional relationship ended. The comparison point significantly influences romantic judgments. Job satisfaction can be influenced by contrast effects when people change positions or learn about colleagues' experiences. A reasonable job might seem wonderful compared to a previous toxic workplace, while the same position could feel disappointing if friends describe much better employment situations. Marketing campaigns use contrast through before and after presentations, competitor comparisons, and problem solution frameworks. Products appear more effective when contrasted with inferior alternatives or when presented as solutions to highlighted problems. The contrast makes benefits seem more dramatic and compelling. Social media amplifies contrast effects by exposing us to curated highlights of others' lives. Our own experiences may seem inadequate when contrasted with others' vacation photos, career achievements, or relationship milestones, even though we are comparing our private reality to others' public presentations. The principle affects decision-making quality by making us susceptible to manipulation through strategic sequencing of options or information. Understanding this bias helps recognize when contrasts are being used to influence our judgments rather than provide objective evaluation criteria. Physical comfort and luxury demonstrate contrast effects clearly. A modest hotel room feels luxurious after camping, while the same room might seem inadequate following a stay at a 5-star resort. Our satisfaction depends heavily on recent comparison points rather than absolute quality standards. Educational contexts show contrast effects when students evaluate their performance relative to recent experiences rather than objective standards. A good grade feels exceptional after struggling with difficult material, while the same grade might feel disappointing following a period of easy success. Understanding the contrast principle helps make more balanced evaluations by considering absolute qualities rather than just recent comparisons. Taking time between contrasting experiences and seeking multiple reference points can provide more stable and accurate judgments. Reciprocity Principle. Reciprocity principle is a fundamental psychological and social rule where people feel obligated to return favors, gifts, or kindnesses that others have given them. This powerful mental mechanism creates a sense of indebtedness that motivates us to repay others, even when their initial gestures were unsolicited or when the return favor exceeds the original gift in value. The principle operates through deep evolutionary and cultural programming that helped human societies function cooperatively. Throughout history, reciprocal relationships enabled survival through mutual aid and resource sharing. Our brains developed automatic responses that create psychological tension when we receive benefits without reciprocating, driving us to restore balance through return gestures. Social relationships rely heavily on reciprocity to maintain trust and cooperation. When someone does us a favor, we experience internal pressure to return the kindness at some point. This creates ongoing bonds and mutual obligations that strengthen communities and personal connections. The principle helps explain why gift-giving, hospitality, and mutual assistance form the foundation of most cultures. Marketing professionals exploit reciprocity through free samples, trial offers, and small gifts. Customers who receive something for free often feel obligated to make purchases, even when the free item has minimal value. The psychological debt created by receiving something without payment motivates reciprocal action through buying behavior. Sales techniques frequently employ reciprocity by having salespeople provide information, assistance, or small services before making their pitch. Once potential customers feel they have received value, they experience pressure to reciprocate by listening seriously to the sales presentation or making purchases they might otherwise decline. Charitable organizations understand reciprocity principles through their fundraising strategies. Sending address labels, calendars, or small gifts along with donation requests creates obligation feelings that increase contribution rates. Recipients feel compelled to reciprocate the gift through monetary donations, even when they did not request the items. Workplace dynamics demonstrate reciprocity through favor exchanges and mutual assistance. Colleagues who help each other with projects, cover shifts, or provide support build reciprocal relationships that enhance teamwork and job satisfaction. These informal networks of mutual obligation often prove more valuable than formal organizational structures. Political contexts showcase reciprocity through vote trading, coalition building, and mutual support agreements. Politicians who assist colleagues with their initiatives expect similar support for their own proposals. This creates complex webs of mutual obligation that influence legislative processes and policy outcomes. The principle can create ethical dilemmas when people use small gestures to manipulate others into much larger commitments. Understanding this dynamic helps recognize when someone might be using reciprocity pressure to influence decisions that do not serve our best interests. Cultural variations exist in how reciprocity operates across different societies. Some cultures emphasize immediate reciprocation, while others allow for longer-term balance in relationships. The specific forms and timing of reciprocal obligations vary, but the underlying principle appears universal across human societies. Digital environments show reciprocity through social media interactions, online reviews, and content sharing. People who receive likes, comments, or shares often feel motivated to reciprocate through similar engagement. This creates the social dynamics that drive much online interaction and community building. Relationship building benefits from understanding reciprocity by creating positive cycles of mutual support and assistance. However, authentic reciprocity differs from calculated exchange by arising from genuine care and relationship investment rather than manipulative obligation creation. The key to managing reciprocity involves recognizing when the pressure to reciprocate serves healthy relationship building versus when it represents manipulation or coercion. Maintaining awareness of this principle helps make conscious choices about when and how to respond to others' gestures. False memory effect. False memory effect is a psychological phenomenon where people remember events that never actually happened or remember real events differently from how they actually occurred. These fabricated or distorted memories feel completely genuine to the person experiencing them, making it nearly impossible to distinguish false memories from authentic ones based on subjective experience alone. The effect occurs because memory is not like a recording device that captures and stores exact copies of experiences. Instead, memory is a reconstructive process where our brains piece together fragments of information each time we recall something. During this reconstruction, our minds can incorporate suggestions, expectations, emotions, and information learned after the original event, creating memories that feel real but are partially or completely inaccurate. Leading questions can implant false memories by suggesting details that were not part of the original experience. Research shows that asking someone if they remember seeing broken glass at an accident scene can create false memories of glass that was never present. The suggestion becomes incorporated into the memory during the recall process, making it seem like part of the original experience. Childhood memories are particularly susceptible to false memory effects because young brains are still developing and because childhood experiences are often recalled and retold many years later. Stories told by family members, photographs, and repeated discussions about past events can all contribute to creating vivid memories of things that never happened or happened very differently. Therapy sessions can inadvertently create false memories when therapists use suggestive techniques or encourage clients to recover repressed memories. While genuine traumatic memories can be forgotten and later remembered, the therapeutic process can sometimes create false memories of abuse or other traumatic events that feel completely real to the person experiencing them. Eyewitness testimony demonstrates the serious legal implications of false memory effects. Witnesses who genuinely believe they remember crime details accurately may have incorporated information learned after the event, such as details from news reports or conversations with other witnesses. These false memories can influence court proceedings and wrongful convictions. Social media and digital technology amplify false memory effects by exposing us to doctored images, misleading information, and others' false memories. Seeing fabricated photos or reading incorrect accounts of events can influence our own memories, making us believe we witnessed things we never actually saw. Emotional intensity can both strengthen accurate memories and increase susceptibility to false memories. Highly emotional situations create vivid memory impressions, but they also make us more likely to accept suggested details that seem consistent with the emotional tone of the experience. The misinformation effect specifically describes how information encountered after an event can alter memory of that event. News reports, conversations, or social media posts about an incident can introduce false details that become integrated into personal memories of witnessing or experiencing the event. Understanding false memory effects helps develop more realistic expectations about memory accuracy and reliability. Recognizing that memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive encourages more careful evaluation of our own recollections and more compassionate responses to others whose memories may differ from ours. The key to managing false memory effects involves maintaining healthy skepticism about memory accuracy while still trusting our general recollections. Corroborating important memories with multiple sources and avoiding leading questions can help maintain more accurate recollections of significant events. Mere exposure effect. Mere exposure effect is a psychological phenomenon where people develop preferences for things simply because they encounter them frequently. This bias demonstrates that familiarity alone can create positive feelings and increased liking, even when we have no other reason to prefer one option over another and even when we are not consciously aware of the repeated exposures. The effect operates through unconscious processing that associates familiarity with safety and positive evaluation. Our brains evolved to be cautious about unfamiliar things because unknown elements could represent threats. Repeated exposure without negative consequences signals that something is safe, leading to gradually increased comfort and preference for familiar stimuli over novel alternatives. Advertising campaigns exploit this principle extensively by repeating brand names, jingles, and visual imagery across multiple platforms and time periods. Even when people claim to dislike repetitive advertisements, the mere exposure often increases brand recognition and preference when making purchasing decisions. The familiarity created through repetition translates into trust and positive associations. Music preferences demonstrate this effect clearly through radio play and streaming algorithms. Songs that initially seem unremarkable or even annoying can become favorites after repeated listening. The music industry understands this principle and uses it to promote new artists and songs through consistent radio rotation and playlist placement. Social relationships benefit from mere exposure effects as people tend to develop stronger preferences for others they encounter regularly. Classroom seating arrangements, workplace proximity, and neighborhood interactions all influence relationship formation through increased familiarity. People who see each other frequently often develop friendships based partly on comfort with familiar faces. Political campaigns leverage mere exposure through name recognition and repeated messaging. Candidates who achieve high visibility through advertising, appearances, and media coverage often benefit from increased voter preference, even when policy positions remain unchanged. The familiarity created through exposure can influence voting behavior independent of substantive political considerations. Architecture and design utilize this principle when introducing new styles or concepts that initially seem strange or unappealing. Buildings, interior designs, or artistic styles that receive initial negative reactions often gain acceptance and appreciation as people become accustomed to seeing them regularly in their environment. Language learning showcases mere exposure effects as foreign words and phrases become more comfortable and easier to process through repetition. Students often report that initially difficult languages begin to sound more pleasant and familiar as exposure increases, even before comprehension significantly improves. Stock market behavior sometimes reflects mere exposure bias when investors develop preferences for frequently mentioned companies or investment options. Financial media coverage can create familiarity that influences investment decisions beyond fundamental analysis of company performance or market conditions. Food preferences can change through mere exposure as people develop taste for cuisines or specific dishes through repeated encounters. Items that initially seem unappealing or unusual often become preferred options after multiple tastings create familiarity and comfort with new flavors. However, mere exposure effects have limits and can reverse if repetition becomes excessive. Overexposure can lead to boredom, irritation, or negative associations when the frequency exceeds optimal levels. The key lies in finding the right amount of repetition to create positive familiarity without reaching saturation points. Cultural factors influence how mere exposure operates across different societies and individual personality types. Some people show stronger preferences for familiar things, while others actively seek novelty and variety. Understanding these individual differences helps predict when mere exposure effects will be strongest. The principle has important implications for decision-making quality when familiarity substitutes for careful evaluation of actual merits. Recognizing mere exposure bias helps ensure that preferences are based on genuine value rather than simply comfort with familiar options. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological state of mental discomfort that occurs when a person holds contradictory beliefs, values, or attitudes simultaneously, or when their behavior conflicts with their stated beliefs. This internal tension creates an unpleasant feeling that motivates people to reduce the inconsistency by changing their thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors to restore mental harmony. The theory explains why people often rationalize poor decisions or modify their beliefs after acting in ways that contradict their original values. When faced with inconsistency between thoughts and actions, our minds automatically work to resolve the conflict because the discomfort of holding contradictory ideas feels psychologically threatening and unstable. Buyer's remorse demonstrates cognitive dissonance clearly when someone makes an expensive purchase and then experiences doubt about whether they made the right choice. To reduce this mental discomfort, they might focus on positive aspects of their purchase while downplaying negative features or the appeal of alternatives they did not choose. Smoking behavior showcases dissonance when people continue smoking despite knowing the health risks. Rather than quit smoking or ignore the health information, many smokers reduce dissonance by minimizing the dangers, emphasizing potential benefits like stress relief, or convincing themselves that the risks apply to other people but not to them personally. Political beliefs often involve cognitive dissonance when people encounter information that contradicts their preferred candidate or party positions. Instead of changing their political allegiance, many people reduce dissonance by dismissing contradictory information as biased, seeking sources that confirm their existing views, or reinterpreting facts to fit their established political framework. Relationship conflicts reveal dissonance when people stay in unsatisfying partnerships despite recognizing serious problems. To reduce the mental discomfort of remaining in poor relationships, they might minimize the significance of problems, focus on positive memories, or convince themselves that all relationships have similar difficulties. Educational settings demonstrate dissonance when students receive poor grades despite believing they are capable learners. Rather than accept that they need to study more effectively, students might reduce dissonance by blaming teachers, claiming tests were unfair, or deciding that the subject matter is not important for their future goals. Religious and moral contexts frequently involve cognitive dissonance when people's actions contradict their stated ethical principles. Rather than changing their behavior to match their values, people often modify their interpretation of moral rules or create exceptions that justify their actions while maintaining their overall belief system. Workplace situations show dissonance when employees remain in jobs that conflict with their personal values or career goals. To reduce mental discomfort, they might emphasize financial necessity, convince themselves that their work serves important purposes, or modify their career aspirations to match their current reality. The sunk cost fallacy relates to cognitive dissonance when people continue investing time, money, or effort in failing projects because stopping would mean admitting their previous investments were mistakes. The discomfort of acknowledging poor past decisions motivates continued investment even when future prospects appear dim. Festinger's original experiment demonstrated cognitive dissonance by having participants perform boring tasks and then describe them as interesting to others. Participants paid small amounts for lying experienced more dissonance and actually changed their opinions about the tasks, while those paid larger amounts maintained their original negative views. Understanding cognitive dissonance helps recognize when we might be rationalizing poor decisions or avoiding necessary changes. Awareness of this psychological tendency allows for more honest self-evaluation and better decision-making by acknowledging when our beliefs and actions are inconsistent. The key to managing cognitive dissonance involves accepting that some mental discomfort is normal and healthy when it signals the need for genuine change rather than rationalization. Pygmalion Effect. Pygmalion Effect is a psychological phenomenon where higher expectations placed on individuals lead to improved performance and achievement. This self-fulfilling prophecy demonstrates that when teachers, managers, or other authority figures believe someone will succeed, they unconsciously behave in ways that help make that success more likely to occur. The effect gets its name from the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with his own creation and wished for it to come to life. Similarly, high expectations can breathe life into potential that might otherwise remain dormant. The mechanism works through subtle changes in behavior that authority figures make when they expect excellence from certain individuals. Teachers who expect students to perform well unconsciously provide more attention, encouragement, and learning opportunities to those students. They call on high expectation students more frequently, give them more time to answer questions, and offer more detailed feedback on their work. These small but consistent differences in treatment create environments where expected success becomes more achievable. Workplace environments showcase the Pygmalion effect when managers assign challenging projects and additional responsibilities to employees they believe have high potential. These chosen individuals receive more mentoring, feedback, and developmental opportunities. The increased investment and support help them develop skills and confidence that lead to the superior performance their managers originally expected. Athletic coaches demonstrate this principle by investing more training time and attention in athletes they believe will excel. Players who receive this enhanced coaching often develop better skills and confidence, leading to improved performance that validates the coach's initial expectations. The belief in potential becomes a catalyst for actualizing that potential. Parenting relationships reveal Pygmalion effects when parents who expect their children to succeed academically or socially provide more support, resources, and encouragement. Children who receive these positive expectations often internalize them and work harder to meet the standards their parents have communicated through their behavior and attitudes. Military training utilizes this principle when drill instructors identify recruits with leadership potential and provide them with additional challenges and responsibilities. These selected individuals often develop the leadership skills and confidence that their instructors expected, creating a pipeline of capable leaders through expectation-driven development. The effect works through multiple psychological mechanisms. Authority figures who hold high expectations communicate confidence through their tone of voice, body language, and verbal interactions. They provide more challenging material, allow more time for responses, and offer more praise for effort and improvement. These behaviors create positive learning environments that facilitate growth. Self-concept changes occur when individuals internalize the positive expectations others hold for them. People begin to see themselves as capable and worthy of success, which motivates increased effort and persistence. This internal shift from doubt to confidence becomes a powerful driver of improved performance. However, the Pygmalion effect requires genuine belief rather than artificial attempts to manufacture high expectations. People can sense authenticity in others' expectations, and insincere attempts to create high expectations often fail to produce the desired improvements in performance. Understanding this effect helps leaders, teachers, and parents create more effective development environments by consciously maintaining high but achievable expectations for those under their influence while providing the support necessary to help people reach those elevated standards. Golem Effect. The Golem Effect is a psychological phenomenon where low expectations lead to decreased performance in others. This concept works as the dark mirror of the Pygmalion Effect. When teachers, managers, or authority figures hold negative expectations about someone's abilities, those expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies. The term comes from Jewish folklore. A golem was an artificial being created from clay. It followed instructions but lacked independent thought or initiative. Similarly, when people are treated as if they have limited capabilities, they often begin to embody those limitations. Teachers who expect certain students to fail often unconsciously communicate these expectations. They may call on these students less frequently. They might provide less detailed feedback. Their body language and tone of voice change subtly. These small actions accumulate over time. Students pick up on these subtle cues. They begin to internalize the negative expectations. Their confidence erodes gradually. They stop raising their hands in class. They put less effort into assignments. Their performance begins to match the low expectations placed upon them. This effect extends far beyond classrooms. In workplaces, managers who doubt an employee's potential often see that doubt validated. The employee receives fewer challenging assignments. They get less mentoring and support. Career advancement opportunities become scarce. Eventually, the employee's growth stagnates, confirming the manager's initial skepticism. The Golem effect operates through several mechanisms. Reduced opportunities limit skill development. Less encouragement decreases motivation. Minimal feedback prevents improvement. Social isolation reduces learning from peers. These factors create a downward spiral of diminishing performance. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort. Leaders must examine their own biases honestly. They need to recognize when they're holding unfair expectations. Providing equal opportunities becomes crucial. Offering consistent encouragement helps rebuild confidence. The psychological impact runs deep. People subjected to the Golem Effect often develop learned helplessness. They begin to believe they truly lack ability. This belief becomes internalized and self-reinforcing. Recovery requires both external support and internal work to rebuild self-efficacy. Research shows the Golem Effect affects entire groups as well. When society holds low expectations for certain demographics, those groups may underperform collectively. This creates systemic disadvantages that persist across generations. Understanding this effect empowers both leaders and individuals. Leaders can work to maintain positive expectations for everyone. Individuals can recognize when they're being subjected to unfair limitations. They can seek environments that foster growth and potential. The Golem Effect reminds us that expectations shape reality. What we believe about others becomes part of their lived experience. This knowledge carries both responsibility and opportunity for positive change. Spotlight Effect. The spotlight effect is the tendency to overestimate how much others notice and judge our appearance, behavior, and mistakes. People imagine themselves under a bright spotlight with everyone watching their every move. This creates unnecessary anxiety and self-consciousness in social situations. This psychological bias stems from our natural self-focus. We spend all our time inside our own heads. Every embarrassing moment feels magnified because we experience it so intensely. We remember our awkward stumbles, verbal slip-ups, and clothing mishaps vividly. This internal focus makes us assume others notice these things just as much. Research consistently shows this assumption is wrong. Other people are far less observant of our flaws than we believe. They're usually preoccupied with their own concerns, appearance, and performance. Everyone else is dealing with their own version of the spotlight effect. Studies demonstrate this gap between perception and reality. Participants who wore embarrassing t-shirts estimated that half the room noticed their shirt. In reality, only about 23% actually noticed. The difference between imagined attention and actual attention is striking. The spotlight effect affects various aspects of daily life. Public speaking becomes terrifying because we imagine the audience scrutinizing every word and gesture. Walking into restaurants alone feels overwhelming because we think everyone is staring. Wearing something slightly different creates anxiety about standing out. Social media amplifies this effect dramatically. Every post feels like it's being examined by hundreds of people. We worry about the perfect caption, the right filter, the ideal timing. The reality is that most people scroll quickly past without much thought. Their attention spans are limited and divided among countless other posts. This bias can be paralyzing in professional settings. Presentations feel like performances under harsh lights. We imagine colleagues analyzing every slide, every pause, every hand gesture. Most attendees are thinking about their own work, checking emails, or planning their next meeting. Understanding the spotlight effect brings immediate relief. Realizing that others aren't watching as closely reduces social anxiety. It encourages more authentic behavior and self-expression. People become willing to take reasonable risks and try new things. The effect also influences memory formation. We remember our own embarrassing moments more clearly than similar moments involving others. This asymmetry reinforces the illusion that our mistakes are more memorable and significant than they actually are. Breaking free from the spotlight effect requires conscious effort. Remind yourself that everyone is primarily focused on themselves. Ask friends if they remember specific embarrassing moments you're worried about. Usually, they don't recall these incidents at all. Practice self-compassion when mistakes happen. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd show a friend. Remember that perfection isn't expected or required in social interactions. Small imperfections make you more relatable and human. The spotlight effect reveals our fundamental self-centeredness as humans. While this sounds negative, it's actually liberating. If everyone is primarily focused on themselves, then you have more freedom to be authentic without fear of constant judgment. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is the psychological tendency where losing something feels approximately twice as painful as gaining the same thing feels good. People experience losses more intensely than equivalent gains. This asymmetry in how we process positive and negative outcomes shapes countless decisions throughout our lives. The concept emerged from behavioral economics research. Scientists discovered that humans aren't the rational decision makers traditional economics assumed. Instead, we're wired to avoid losses more strongly than we seek gains. This bias served our ancestors well when resources were scarce and losing meant potential death. Simple experiments demonstrate this principle clearly. Researchers give participants a coffee mug and then offer to buy it back. The price people demand to sell their mug is consistently higher than what they'd pay to buy the same mug. The pain of losing something they own outweighs the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This effect explains why people stay in unsatisfying jobs, relationships, or living situations. The fear of losing what they have overrides the potential benefits of making a change. Even when the current situation is mediocre, the unknown risks feel too threatening to pursue. Loss aversion drives many business strategies. Free trials work because canceling feels like losing something you already have. Loyalty programs create artificial losses when points expire. Insurance companies emphasize what you'll lose without coverage rather than what you'll gain with it. Investment behavior showcases loss aversion dramatically. Investors hold losing stocks too long hoping to break even. They sell winning stocks too quickly to lock in gains. This pattern directly contradicts optimal investment strategy but feels emotionally safer. The endowment effect stems from loss aversion. Once we own something, we value it more highly than before we owned it. Selling a house often feels more painful than the satisfaction of buying it originally provided. Our attachment to possessions grows stronger once they become ours. Negotiation dynamics shift due to loss aversion. Framing proposals in terms of what the other party might lose creates more urgency than highlighting potential gains. Political campaigns often focus on what opponents will take away rather than what they'll provide. Status quo bias connects directly to loss aversion. Changing from the current situation involves risk of loss. Staying with familiar options feels safer even when better alternatives exist. This keeps people trapped in suboptimal circumstances across many life domains. Overcoming loss aversion requires conscious awareness of this bias. When facing decisions, actively consider what you might gain rather than only focusing on potential losses. Set specific criteria for when to cut losses rather than making emotional decisions in the moment. Reframing helps combat this tendency. Instead of thinking about losing money on a bad investment, consider it as paying for valuable learning. Rather than losing time on a failed project, view it as gaining experience and wisdom. The psychological roots run deep because loss aversion helped humans survive dangerous environments. Those who were cautious about losing resources lived longer and reproduced more successfully. Modern life rarely involves life or death decisions, but our brains still operate with ancient programming. Understanding loss aversion empowers better decision-making. Recognize when this bias might be influencing your choices. Consider both gains and losses objectively. Sometimes accepting a loss opens doors to much greater future gains. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is the psychological phenomenon where people value items more highly simply because they own them. Once something becomes ours, we assign it greater worth than we would if we didn't possess it. This irrational attachment to ownership influences countless decisions in daily life. This effect challenges traditional economic theory, which assumes consistent valuations regardless of ownership status. Classical economics suggests a coffee mug should have the same value whether you own it or not. Human psychology reveals a different reality where ownership itself adds perceived value. The classic demonstration involves giving participants random items like coffee mugs or chocolate bars. Researchers then create markets where people can trade these items. Those who received mugs consistently demand higher prices to sell than non-owners are willing to pay. The act of possession alone increases subjective value. Evolutionary psychology offers explanations for this bias. Our ancestors who strongly defended their resources survived better than those who readily gave things away. Territories, tools, and food stores meant the difference between life and death. This protective instinct remains embedded in modern decision-making. The endowment effect appears in real estate markets dramatically. Homeowners often overvalue their properties compared to market assessments. They remember every improvement and personal touch they've added. These emotional investments inflate their perception of the home's worth beyond objective market value. Online marketplaces reveal this effect constantly. Sellers list used items at prices far above what buyers consider reasonable. The sellers remember the original purchase price and their personal use of the item. Buyers see only the current condition and utility without emotional attachment. Children display strong endowment effects even at young ages. Once a toy becomes theirs, they resist trading it for something objectively better. Parents observe this when trying to encourage sharing or trading among siblings. The concept of ownership creates immediate emotional bonds. Business strategies exploit this psychological bias effectively. Free trials create temporary ownership experiences. Customers begin to feel like the product belongs to them. Canceling the trial then feels like losing something rather than simply not buying something. This shifts the decision framework significantly. Return policies work partly through endowment effects. Once customers take products home, ownership feelings develop quickly. Even with generous return policies, many people keep items they might not have purchased after longer consideration. The hassle of returning compounds the ownership attachment. Subscription services leverage this effect masterfully. Monthly payments create ongoing ownership feelings for access to content or services. Canceling subscriptions feels like losing access to something that belongs to you rather than stopping a purchase you haven't made yet. The effect extends beyond physical possessions. People become attached to ideas, routines, and even inconvenient situations simply through familiarity and habitual ownership. Changing jobs feels like losing your current position rather than gaining a new opportunity. Stock ownership demonstrates endowment effects clearly. Investors often hold losing stocks longer than winning ones. They feel attached to shares they own and reluctant to realize losses. This attachment can prevent rational portfolio management and optimal investment strategies. Overcoming the endowment effect requires recognizing when ownership is distorting judgment. Before making decisions, consider what you would do if you didn't already own the item. Ask yourself what price you would pay to acquire something you currently possess. Creating distance helps reduce this bias. When decluttering, imagine you're helping a friend decide what to keep. This removes personal attachment and enables more objective evaluation. Time delays between acquiring items and making decisions also reduce attachment intensity. Ostrich Effect. The Ostrich Effect is the tendency to avoid negative information by ignoring it completely. Like the mythical image of an ostrich burying its head in sand when threatened, people often choose to remain unaware of problems rather than face them directly. This avoidance behavior feels protective in the moment but usually makes situations worse over time. This psychological defense mechanism stems from our natural desire to avoid pain and discomfort. Negative information creates anxiety, stress, and feelings of helplessness. The brain seeks to protect itself by simply avoiding these uncomfortable feelings altogether. Ignorance feels temporarily blissful compared to confronting harsh realities. Financial behavior showcases this effect prominently. People avoid checking their bank accounts when money is tight. They ignore credit card statements during difficult periods. Investment portfolios go unchecked during market downturns. This avoidance prevents taking corrective action when it might still be possible to improve the situation. Medical situations reveal the ostrich effect clearly. Patients skip routine checkups to avoid hearing bad news about their health. They postpone dental visits despite knowing problems exist. Cancer screenings get delayed indefinitely because the possibility of positive results feels too frightening to face. Students demonstrate this behavior during academic struggles. They avoid checking grades online when they know they're performing poorly. Assignment deadlines pass ignored rather than confronted. Course withdrawals happen too late because students refuse to acknowledge their academic situation earlier. Relationship problems often involve ostrich-like avoidance. Partners ignore obvious signs of relationship deterioration. They avoid difficult conversations that might reveal fundamental incompatibilities. Communication breaks down because both parties prefer comfortable ignorance over uncomfortable truth. The digital age amplifies opportunities for this avoidance. Unread emails pile up when they might contain negative news. Social media feeds get curated to exclude challenging information. News consumption becomes selective to maintain emotional comfort rather than staying informed about reality. Climate change discussions trigger ostrich effects on massive scales. The overwhelming nature of environmental problems makes many people shut down completely. Instead of engaging with the issue constructively, they choose complete avoidance. This collective head-burying prevents necessary action on urgent problems. Business leaders exhibit this behavior when companies face difficulties. They avoid analyzing declining sales figures. Market research showing consumer dissatisfaction gets ignored. Financial reports revealing problems remain unread. This avoidance prevents timely course corrections that might save the business. The effect creates vicious cycles where problems compound while being ignored. Medical conditions worsen without treatment. Financial debt accumulates with interest and penalties. Relationship issues fester and become harder to resolve. Academic performance continues declining without intervention. Breaking the ostrich effect requires conscious effort and often external support. Setting specific times for confronting difficult information helps. Having trusted friends or advisors who provide accountability makes avoidance harder. Professional help from counselors, financial advisors, or coaches provides structured approaches to facing problems. Gradual exposure works better than forcing immediate confrontation. Start by acknowledging that avoidance is happening. Then take small steps toward gathering information. Check one account balance rather than avoiding all financial information. Schedule one medical appointment rather than trying to address all health concerns simultaneously. Reframing negative information as opportunity for improvement helps reduce avoidance. Problems identified early are usually easier to solve than those discovered later. Knowledge empowers action while ignorance guarantees continued deterioration. Understanding this intellectually helps overcome emotional resistance to difficult truths. The ostrich effect represents a fundamental tension between short-term emotional comfort and long-term practical benefit. Recognizing this trade-off enables more conscious choices about when to seek information versus when to protect mental health through temporary avoidance. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to perceive past events as more predictable than they actually were at the time. People look back at outcomes and convince themselves they knew it all along. This psychological phenomenon distorts memory and creates false confidence in our ability to predict future events. The bias emerges because knowing the outcome changes how we remember the original situation. Once we know what happened, alternative possibilities fade from memory. The path that led to the actual result seems obvious and inevitable. We forget how uncertain and confusing things felt when we were living through them. Historical events demonstrate this effect clearly. People claim they always knew certain political candidates would win elections. Stock market crashes seem predictable after they happen. Natural disasters appear to have obvious warning signs that should have been heeded earlier. These retrospective insights feel genuine but are largely reconstructions. Students experience hindsight bias frequently during exams. After learning the correct answers, the wrong choices they initially considered seem obviously incorrect. They genuinely believe they should have known better. This creates unrealistic expectations for future performance and unnecessary self-criticism about past mistakes. Medical professionals struggle with this bias when reviewing cases. After a diagnosis is confirmed, earlier symptoms seem to point clearly toward that conclusion. Alternative diagnoses that were reasonable at the time appear foolish in retrospect. This can lead to overconfidence and failure to consider multiple possibilities in future cases. Investment decisions showcase hindsight bias dramatically. After market movements occur, the reasons seem apparent and predictable. Investors convince themselves they should have seen the trends coming. This false confidence leads to increased risk-taking and poor decision-making in subsequent investments. The bias affects learning negatively by creating illusions of understanding. When studying, students who know the answers believe the material is easier than it actually is. They underestimate how much preparation they need for future tests. This leads to inadequate studying and disappointing performance. Relationships suffer from hindsight bias when conflicts arise. After arguments, people remember warning signs that seemed obvious in retrospect. They forget how good things felt before problems emerged. This distorted memory makes it harder to learn from relationship mistakes and improve communication patterns. Business decisions appear more predictable after outcomes are known. Successful product launches seem to have obvious appeal that should have guaranteed success. Failed ventures display clear warning signs that seem inexcusable to ignore. This prevents accurate analysis of decision-making processes and lessons learned. The bias stems from our brain's need to create coherent narratives. Random events and uncertain outcomes create anxiety and confusion. Retrospective predictability provides comfort and the illusion of control. Our minds automatically construct stories that make the past seem logical and foreseeable. Legal systems must account for hindsight bias in malpractice cases. Juries evaluating medical decisions often judge doctors based on known outcomes rather than information available at the time. This unfairly penalizes professionals who made reasonable decisions with incomplete information. Overcoming hindsight bias requires conscious effort to remember uncertainty. Keep records of your predictions and reasoning before outcomes occur. Document the information available at decision time. Review these records later to maintain realistic perspectives on your predictive abilities. Consider alternative outcomes that could have occurred with the same initial information. Remember that good decisions can lead to bad outcomes due to factors beyond anyone's control. Focus on evaluating decision-making processes rather than just results when learning from experience. IKEA Effect. The IKEA effect is the psychological tendency to value things more highly when we have put effort into creating or building them ourselves. People develop stronger emotional attachments to items they assembled, made, or contributed to compared to identical items they simply purchased ready-made. This bias gets its name from the Swedish furniture company where customers assemble their own purchases. The effect occurs because effort creates psychological ownership beyond mere possession. When we invest time and energy into something, it becomes part of our identity. Our labor transforms a generic product into something personal and meaningful. The sweat equity we contribute feels like it adds real value to the final result. Research demonstrates this bias through various experiments. Participants who fold origami cranes value their creations much higher than identical cranes folded by others. People who assemble IKEA furniture rate their finished products as more valuable than the same furniture assembled by professionals. The effort invested creates inflated perceived worth. Children's artwork illustrates this effect powerfully. Parents treasure their child's drawings and crafts far beyond any objective artistic merit. The knowledge that their child created something with their own hands makes it precious. Professional artwork of superior quality cannot compete with the emotional value of these homemade creations. Cooking demonstrates the IKEA effect in daily life. Meals prepared at home often taste better to the cook than identical food prepared by others. The effort of shopping, chopping, seasoning, and cooking creates investment in the outcome. Even simple dishes feel more satisfying when we made them ourselves rather than ordering takeout. Business models exploit this psychological bias effectively. Build-A-Bear workshops charge premium prices for stuffed animals that customers assemble themselves. Pottery painting studios succeed because people value their handmade ceramics more than mass-produced alternatives. The labor investment justifies higher prices and creates customer satisfaction. Home improvement projects showcase this effect clearly. People often overvalue renovations they completed personally compared to professional work. DIY bathroom tiles or painted rooms feel more valuable because of the sweat equity invested. This can lead to unrealistic expectations about property values and return on investment. The effect extends beyond physical creation to intellectual contributions. Ideas we help develop feel more valuable than those presented to us complete. Meeting participants prefer solutions they contributed to over potentially better ideas from others. Collaborative processes succeed partly because they create buy-in through effort investment. Social media platforms leverage this bias through user-generated content. People value their posts, photos, and profiles highly because they created them. The time spent crafting the perfect caption or selecting the right filter creates attachment. This investment keeps users engaged and returning to the platform regularly. Educational settings benefit from understanding this effect. Students remember and value lessons more when they participate actively rather than passively receiving information. Group projects and hands-on activities create investment in learning outcomes. The effort required makes knowledge feel more personal and meaningful. The bias can lead to poor decision-making when effort investment clouds objective judgment. People continue projects that should be abandoned because they cannot bear to waste previous work. Sunk cost fallacy combines with the IKEA effect to trap people in unproductive activities. Overcoming this bias requires separating effort invested from objective value. Consider what you would pay for something if you hadn't made it yourself. Seek outside opinions on projects where your investment might cloud judgment. Remember that effort alone doesn't guarantee quality or value. Understanding the IKEA effect helps explain why handmade gifts feel more meaningful than expensive purchases. The recipient recognizes the time and effort invested. This knowledge creates appreciation beyond the item's practical utility or aesthetic appeal. The maker's investment becomes part of the gift's emotional value. Frequency illusion. Frequency illusion is the phenomenon where something you recently learned about or noticed suddenly seems to appear everywhere. Also known as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, this cognitive bias makes rare things feel common simply because your attention has been drawn to them. The actual frequency hasn't changed, but your awareness has dramatically increased. This effect occurs through two psychological mechanisms working together. First, selective attention makes you more likely to notice things that are currently relevant to your thoughts. Second, confirmation bias makes these instances feel more significant and memorable than they actually are. Your brain starts actively seeking out examples of this newly relevant information. Car shopping provides a classic example of frequency illusion. Before deciding on a specific model, you might never notice how many Honda Civics drive past your house. Once you start considering buying one, every Honda Civic on the road catches your attention. The number of cars hasn't increased, but your awareness has changed completely. Pregnancy announcements trigger this effect frequently. After someone close to you announces they're expecting, pregnant women seem to appear everywhere. Baby strollers fill the sidewalks. Maternity clothes dominate store displays. The pregnancy rate hasn't suddenly spiked, but your brain now notices what was always there. Medical students experience frequency illusion when studying diseases. After learning about rare conditions, they start seeing symptoms everywhere. Friends and family members suddenly seem to display signs of obscure illnesses. This creates unnecessary anxiety and can lead to hypochondriac tendencies during medical training. New vocabulary words demonstrate this bias clearly. Once you learn an unfamiliar word, it appears in articles, conversations, and books with surprising regularity. The word was always present in these contexts, but your brain filtered it out until it became relevant to your knowledge base. Social media algorithms amplify frequency illusion artificially. When you engage with content about specific topics, platforms show you more similar content. This creates echo chambers where certain ideas or products seem more popular than they actually are. The algorithm feeds your new interest until it dominates your feed. Investment markets showcase this effect through stock picking behavior. After researching a particular company, investors notice news about that stock constantly. Every mention feels significant and worth analyzing. This can lead to overconfidence in investment decisions based on seemingly abundant information that's actually just selective attention. The illusion affects consumer behavior significantly. After considering a purchase, advertisements for that product seem to multiply overnight. You start noticing reviews, recommendations, and discussions about items you're contemplating buying. Marketing teams understand this and time their campaigns to capitalize on this heightened awareness. Name recognition works through frequency illusion principles. Once you learn someone's name, you encounter it repeatedly in various contexts. This isn't coincidence but rather your brain's new sensitivity to previously filtered information. The name was always present but unnoticed until it became personally relevant. Understanding frequency illusion prevents overreacting to apparent patterns. When something seems to be happening more often, consider whether your attention has recently shifted toward that topic. Ask yourself if the frequency has actually increased or if you're simply more aware now. The effect can be useful for learning and memory. When studying new concepts, your brain becomes attuned to related information everywhere. This natural tendency helps reinforce learning through repeated exposure in different contexts. Educational environments can leverage this by introducing topics just before students encounter them naturally. Breaking through frequency illusion requires conscious effort to maintain perspective. Keep track of baseline frequencies before your attention shifts. Seek out diverse information sources to avoid confirmation bias. Remember that correlation between your awareness and apparent frequency doesn't indicate actual changes in occurrence rates. The phenomenon reveals how much our brains filter everyday information. Without this filtering, we would be overwhelmed by constant stimulation. Frequency illusion shows us glimpses of everything our minds usually ignore to maintain focus and sanity in information-rich environments. McGurk Effect. The McGurk Effect is a perceptual phenomenon where what you hear changes based on what you see. When audio and visual speech signals conflict, your brain creates a third perception that doesn't match either the sound or the lip movements alone. This effect demonstrates how vision powerfully influences auditory processing in ways we rarely notice. The classic experiment involves playing the sound ba while showing a video of someone's lips saying ga. Most people hear da, which is neither the actual sound nor what the lips are doing. The brain attempts to reconcile conflicting sensory information by creating a compromised perception that feels real and consistent. This effect happens automatically without conscious awareness. Even when people know about the McGurk effect and understand what's happening, they cannot prevent their brains from creating the blended perception. The integration of sight and sound occurs at such a fundamental level that conscious knowledge cannot override it. Movies and television rely on this effect constantly. Dialogue recorded in studios rarely matches actors' lip movements perfectly. Your brain automatically adjusts what you hear to match what you see on screen. This seamless integration allows entertainment media to use dubbed audio without viewers noticing the misalignment. Language learning showcases the McGurk effect significantly. Students watching foreign films with subtitles often think they understand more spoken language than they actually do. Their brains blend visual text information with audio sounds to create enhanced comprehension. This can give false confidence in listening skills. Hearing impaired individuals experience amplified McGurk effects. Those who rely partially on lip reading show stronger visual influence on auditory perception. Their brains become more skilled at integrating visual speech cues with whatever auditory information they can process. The effect varies across different languages and sounds. Some phonetic combinations create stronger McGurk effects than others. Cultural and linguistic backgrounds influence how readily people experience these audio-visual integrations. Native speakers of tonal languages show different patterns than speakers of non-tonal languages. Ventriloquism exploits the McGurk effect through deliberate audio-visual mismatch. When the puppet's mouth moves convincingly while the ventriloquist's lips remain still, audiences hear the voice coming from the puppet. The visual movement overrides the actual audio location to create the illusion. Age affects the strength of McGurk effects. Children show stronger visual influence on auditory perception than adults. Elderly individuals also demonstrate increased reliance on visual cues as hearing naturally declines with age. This suggests the effect serves as a compensatory mechanism throughout life. The phenomenon reveals fundamental aspects of human perception. Rather than processing senses independently, the brain constantly integrates multiple information streams. This integration usually helps us understand the world more accurately but can create illusions when sensory signals conflict. Noisy environments amplify McGurk effects naturally. When background sounds make hearing difficult, visual cues become more important for speech comprehension. Restaurants, parties, and crowded spaces force greater reliance on lip reading and facial expressions to understand conversations. Understanding this effect helps explain communication difficulties in certain situations. Phone conversations eliminate visual cues that normally support auditory comprehension. Video calls with poor audio-visual synchronization can create McGurk-like confusion that makes communication more difficult than expected. The effect demonstrates plasticity in sensory processing. Professional lip readers develop enhanced abilities to extract speech information from visual cues alone. Sign language interpreters show altered audio-visual integration patterns that help them process multiple communication channels simultaneously. Research applications use the McGurk effect to study brain development, hearing disorders, and language processing. Scientists can manipulate audio-visual combinations to understand how different populations integrate sensory information and where processing might break down. Barnum Effect. The Barnum effect is the tendency to accept vague, general personality descriptions as uniquely accurate for yourself. People read generic statements that could apply to almost anyone and believe they describe their specific characteristics perfectly. This psychological phenomenon explains why horoscopes, personality tests, and fortune-telling feel so personally relevant despite being deliberately broad. The effect gets its name from circus showman P.T. Barnum, who famously said there's a sucker born every minute. Barnum understood that people desperately want to feel special and understood. Generic statements that seem personal exploit this fundamental human desire for recognition and validation. Classic Barnum statements include phrases like "you have a great need for other people to like and admire you," or "you tend to be critical of yourself." These descriptions feel specific and insightful but actually apply to virtually everyone. The brilliance lies in their universal applicability disguised as personal insight. Astrology relies heavily on the Barnum effect to maintain credibility. Horoscope predictions use carefully crafted language that feels specific while remaining broadly applicable. Phrases like "unexpected opportunities may arise" or "someone close to you needs attention" could happen to anyone on any given day. Personality tests often exploit this bias through flattering generalizations. Statements like "you are more creative than most people realize" or "you have untapped potential waiting to be discovered" make readers feel understood and validated. The positive tone increases acceptance of the description's accuracy. Online personality quizzes demonstrate the Barnum effect constantly. Results combine generic positive traits with mild criticisms that feel balanced and realistic. People share these results enthusiastically because they seem to capture something essential about their identity, despite being randomly generated combinations of common characteristics. The effect works because people focus on hits while ignoring misses. When reading personality descriptions, individuals notice statements that seem accurate while overlooking those that don't fit. This selective attention creates the illusion that the overall description is remarkably precise. Cold reading techniques used by psychics and mentalists rely on Barnum principles. Practitioners make broad statements and watch for client reactions. They elaborate on statements that generate positive responses while quickly moving past those that miss the mark. This creates the impression of supernatural insight. Fortune cookies succeed through Barnum Effect principles. Generic advice like "your hard work will pay off soon" feels personally meaningful because everyone experiences effort and hopes for rewards. The vague timing and universal applicability ensure the message seems relevant to current circumstances. Workplace personality assessments sometimes fall victim to this bias. Employees may accept generic feedback as accurate self-insight simply because it's presented in an official, scientific context. This can lead to poor decision-making based on false self-understanding rather than genuine personality assessment. The effect reveals human psychology's need for validation and understanding. People crave recognition of their uniqueness and complexity. When someone or something appears to get them, the emotional satisfaction overrides critical thinking about the statement's actual specificity. Social media algorithms exploit Barnum principles through personalized content that feels individually targeted. Generic lifestyle advice or motivational quotes seem specially chosen for each user. The illusion of personalization increases engagement and sharing despite the content's broad applicability. Overcoming the Barnum effect requires skeptical evaluation of personality feedback. Ask whether statements could apply to most people in similar situations. Look for specific, falsifiable claims rather than vague generalizations. Seek multiple perspectives and concrete evidence before accepting personality insights. Understanding this bias helps evaluate various forms of personality assessment more critically. Legitimate psychological tools provide specific, measurable insights that distinguish individuals from broader populations. Generic flattery disguised as personal insight serves entertainment purposes but shouldn't guide important life decisions. The Barnum effect ultimately reflects the human desire to be seen and understood. While this vulnerability can be exploited, it also represents a fundamental need for connection and self-awareness that drives personal growth and meaningful relationships when channeled appropriately. Placebo effect. The placebo effect is the phenomenon where people experience real improvements in their condition after receiving fake or inactive treatments. When patients believe they are getting medicine, their bodies often respond as if they actually received active medication. This demonstrates the powerful connection between mind and body in healing processes. The word placebo comes from Latin meaning "I will please." Originally, doctors used sugar pills or saline injections to satisfy patients who insisted on treatment when no effective medicine existed. These fake treatments sometimes produced genuine improvements that surprised both patients and physicians. The effect works through several biological mechanisms. Expectation of relief triggers the brain to release natural painkillers called endorphins. The ritual of receiving treatment activates healing responses in the nervous system. Positive beliefs about recovery can strengthen immune function and reduce stress hormones. Medical research must account for placebo effects through controlled studies. Half the participants receive real medication while the other half get identical-looking fake pills. Neither patients nor researchers know who receives which treatment until the study ends. This prevents expectations from influencing results. Pain relief shows some of the strongest placebo responses. Patients given fake pain medication often report significant improvement. Brain scans reveal actual changes in pain processing regions when people believe they're receiving effective treatment. The subjective experience of pain decreases even without active medication. Depression studies demonstrate powerful placebo effects that complicate treatment research. People taking fake antidepressants sometimes improve as much as those on real medication. The hope and attention involved in treatment participation can lift mood independently of any chemical intervention. Surgery produces placebo effects through elaborate medical rituals. Patients who undergo fake operations sometimes improve as much as those receiving real procedures. The belief that something significant has been done to help them triggers healing responses that produce measurable benefits. The effect extends beyond medical treatments to alternative therapies. Acupuncture, homeopathy, and energy healing may work partly through placebo mechanisms. When people strongly believe these treatments will help, their bodies often respond positively regardless of the therapy's direct biological effects. Expensive placebos work better than cheap ones. Patients given costly fake medications report greater improvement than those receiving inexpensive placebos. The price creates expectations of higher quality and effectiveness that translate into stronger healing responses. Doctor-patient relationships influence placebo strength significantly. Warm, confident physicians who express optimism about treatment outcomes produce stronger placebo effects. Patients who trust their doctors and feel cared for show better responses to both real and fake treatments. The nocebo effect represents the placebo's dark twin. When people expect negative side effects, they often experience them even with inactive treatments. Patients warned about potential problems frequently develop those exact symptoms despite receiving harmless substances. Athletic performance demonstrates placebo effects beyond medical settings. Athletes given fake performance enhancers sometimes improve their times or strength. The belief in enhancement creates confidence and reduces anxiety that can genuinely improve physical performance. Understanding placebo effects helps optimize all treatments. Real medications work better when patients believe in their effectiveness. Positive expectations enhance recovery while negative expectations can interfere with healing. The mind's influence on health extends far beyond conscious awareness. Ethical debates surround placebo use in clinical practice. Some argue that deception undermines patient trust and informed consent. Others contend that harnessing placebo effects through hope and positive expectations represents good medicine that should be encouraged. The placebo effect reveals the brain's remarkable ability to influence physical health. While fake treatments should never replace proven medicine for serious conditions, understanding this mind-body connection can enhance conventional therapy. Optimism, trust, and positive expectations become valuable tools in promoting healing and recovery. Nocebo effect. The nocebo effect is the phenomenon where negative expectations about a treatment cause people to experience harmful side effects or worsen symptoms. Unlike the placebo effect where positive beliefs create healing, the nocebo effect demonstrates how pessimistic thoughts and fears can manifest as real physical problems. This dark mirror of placebo shows the mind's power to harm as well as heal. The word nocebo comes from Latin meaning I will harm. When patients expect pain, illness, or side effects, their bodies often comply with these negative expectations. The anticipation of suffering creates actual suffering through complex psychological and physiological pathways that researchers are still working to understand fully. Medical settings showcase nocebo effects prominently during informed consent discussions. When doctors list potential side effects of medications, some patients develop those exact problems despite receiving harmless substances. The mere suggestion of nausea, headaches, or fatigue can trigger these symptoms in susceptible individuals. Clinical trials must carefully balance honest disclosure with nocebo risks. Researchers found that patients warned about potential side effects report those problems more frequently than those given less detailed warnings. This creates ethical dilemmas about how much negative information to share with participants. Anxiety amplifies nocebo responses significantly. Patients who are already worried about their health or treatment show stronger negative reactions to suggestions of harm. Stress hormones and heightened nervous system activity create physical conditions that make suggested symptoms more likely to occur. Cultural beliefs influence nocebo strength across different populations. Some societies have strong traditions connecting thoughts to physical health. People from these backgrounds may show more pronounced nocebo effects when exposed to negative suggestions about treatments or outcomes. The internet age has expanded nocebo opportunities dramatically. Online forums discussing medication side effects can create mass nocebo responses. People reading about others' negative experiences begin expecting similar problems for themselves. This digital sharing of fears amplifies collective anxiety about treatments. Voodoo death represents an extreme example of nocebo effects. Anthropologists document cases where people died after being cursed or told they would die. The absolute belief in impending doom created psychological and physical stress sufficient to cause actual death in otherwise healthy individuals. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity demonstrates modern nocebo effects. Some people report illness when exposed to cell phone towers or Wi-Fi signals. Controlled studies show these symptoms occur even when the devices are turned off. Suggesting expectation rather than electromagnetic fields causes the problems. Healthcare workers must navigate nocebo effects carefully. Negative attitudes or pessimistic comments from medical staff can worsen patient outcomes. Conversely, maintaining hope and confidence while being honest about risks requires delicate communication skills. The effect reveals how deeply interconnected mind and body truly are. Negative thoughts create measurable changes in immune function, pain sensitivity, and stress responses. These biological changes then produce the very symptoms that people feared would occur. Breaking nocebo cycles requires conscious effort to manage expectations. Focus on positive treatment outcomes rather than dwelling on potential problems. Seek information from reliable sources rather than anxiety-provoking online discussions. Work with healthcare providers who balance honesty with optimism. Understanding nocebo effects empowers better health decisions. Recognize when fear might be contributing to symptoms. Challenge catastrophic thinking about treatments or conditions. Remember that worrying about side effects can actually create the problems you hope to avoid. The nocebo effect ultimately teaches us that our beliefs about health and treatment are not merely mental concepts. They become physical realities that can either support or undermine healing processes in ways that extend far beyond conscious awareness or control. Repetition persuasion. Repetition persuasion is a psychological phenomenon where the simple act of hearing or seeing the same message multiple times increases our likelihood to believe it and be influenced by it. This concept operates on the principle that familiarity breeds acceptance rather than contempt when it comes to information processing. The human brain has evolved to use mental shortcuts called heuristics to process the overwhelming amount of information we encounter daily. One of these shortcuts is the availability heuristic. When we hear something repeatedly, it becomes more easily accessible in our memory. This accessibility is often mistaken by our cognitive system as evidence of truth or importance. Research has shown that people rate statements as more truthful after hearing them multiple times, even when the statements are demonstrably false. This occurs because repeated exposure creates a sense of cognitive fluency. The information feels easier to process, which our brain interprets as a signal of accuracy or validity. Advertisers have long understood this principle. They repeat brand names, slogans, and product benefits across multiple channels and touchpoints. The goal is not necessarily to provide new information with each repetition, but to make their message feel more familiar and trustworthy through sheer exposure. Political campaigns also heavily rely on repetition persuasion. Candidates repeat key phrases, policy positions, and campaign slogans until they become deeply embedded in voters' minds. The repeated messages start to feel more credible and important simply because of their frequency. The effectiveness of repetition persuasion has biological underpinnings. Repeated exposure to information creates stronger neural pathways in the brain. These strengthened connections make the information easier to recall and process, which our cognitive system interprets as a marker of truth or significance. However, there are limits to repetition's effectiveness. Too much repetition can lead to reactance or annoyance. People may become aware of the persuasion attempt and resist it. The sweet spot appears to be moderate repetition that creates familiarity without triggering conscious awareness of the manipulation. Different types of repetition can be employed. Exact repetition involves repeating the same message word for word. Varied repetition presents the same core message using different words or contexts. Both approaches can be effective, but varied repetition may be less likely to trigger resistance. The timing and spacing of repetitions also matter. Spaced repetition, where messages are repeated at intervals, tends to be more effective than massed repetition, where all repetitions occur close together in time. Understanding repetition persuasion helps us become more aware of how our beliefs and preferences can be shaped by simple exposure frequency. It reminds us to evaluate information based on evidence and logic rather than familiarity alone. Fear then relief technique. Fear then relief technique is a psychological manipulation strategy that first creates anxiety or fear in a person, then provides relief from that fear while simultaneously presenting a request or offer. This technique exploits the emotional contrast between fear and relief to increase compliance and acceptance. The technique works by triggering our brain's threat detection system. When we perceive danger or experience fear, our sympathetic nervous system activates. This creates a state of heightened alertness and vulnerability. Our cognitive resources become focused on the perceived threat, making us less likely to critically evaluate information or requests that follow. When relief is provided after the fear response, Our brain experiences a flood of positive emotions. This relief feels especially intense because of the contrast with the previous fear state. During this relief phase, we become more trusting and compliant. Our guard is down because we feel grateful for the removal of the threat. Sales professionals often use this technique. They might first highlight serious problems or risks that the customer faces. They paint vivid pictures of potential losses, failures, or dangers. Then they present their product or service as the solution that eliminates these threats. The customer experiences relief and becomes more likely to make a purchase. Insurance salespeople are particularly skilled at this approach. They first discuss various catastrophic events that could happen to you or your family. They make you imagine financial ruin, health problems, or other disasters. Then they offer insurance as the relief from these worries. The contrast makes their offer seem more valuable and necessary. Political campaigns also employ fear then relief messaging. Politicians first highlight threats to voters' way of life, security, or prosperity. They create anxiety about current conditions or future possibilities. Then they present themselves as the solution who will protect voters from these threats. The technique is effective because it bypasses rational decision-making processes. When we are in a fear state, our prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking, becomes less active. The emotional brain takes over. This makes us more susceptible to persuasion and less likely to carefully evaluate the proposed solution. Medical professionals sometimes inadvertently use this pattern. They might first explain the serious consequences of not treating a condition. This creates fear in the patient. Then they present a treatment option, which provides relief. While this can be medically appropriate, it can also influence patient decision-making beyond purely medical considerations. The timing between fear induction and relief provision is crucial. If too much time passes, the fear may diminish naturally. If relief comes too quickly, the contrast may not be strong enough to create the desired effect. The optimal timing creates maximum emotional contrast. Understanding this technique helps us recognize when it is being used on us. We can learn to pause and engage our rational thinking when we notice fear being induced followed by a convenient solution. This awareness allows us to make more informed decisions rather than reactive ones. Ethical considerations arise when using this technique. While it can be effective for legitimate purposes, it can also be manipulative when used to exploit people's emotions for personal gain. Sleeper Effect. Sleeper effect is a psychological phenomenon where a persuasive message from a low credibility source becomes more influential over time. Initially, people discount the message because they don't trust the source. However, as time passes, they remember the message content while forgetting who delivered it. This separation of message from source allows the information to become more persuasive. The effect occurs because our memory systems process content and source information differently. Content information is stored in one way, while source credibility is stored separately. Over time, we tend to retain the core message better than we remember who said it. This creates a situation where previously dismissed information gains influence. Research has shown that people initially reject messages from untrustworthy sources. They apply what psychologists call a discounting cue. They tell themselves that the information isn't reliable because the source lacks credibility. However, this discounting effect weakens over time while the message content remains accessible in memory. News media provides many examples of the sleeper effect. People might initially dismiss a story because it comes from a source they consider biased or unreliable. However, weeks or months later, they may find themselves influenced by the information they read, having forgotten where they first encountered it. The story has gained credibility simply through the passage of time. Social media accelerates the sleeper effect. Information spreads rapidly across platforms, often separated from its original source. People encounter the same claims multiple times from different accounts. Eventually, the repeated exposure makes the information seem more credible, regardless of where it originated. Advertising agencies sometimes exploit the sleeper effect. They might use celebrity endorsers who aren't particularly credible or trustworthy. Initially, consumers might be skeptical. However, over time, they remember the product benefits while forgetting their reservations about the endorser. The message becomes more persuasive than it was originally. The sleeper effect has important implications for misinformation. False information from dubious sources can gain credibility over time. People who initially recognize the information as unreliable may later accept it as true. They remember the claims but forget their original skepticism about the source. Political communication also demonstrates the sleeper effect. Voters might initially dismiss negative information about a candidate because it comes from an obviously biased source. However, as election day approaches, they may find themselves influenced by those same negative claims. The source skepticism has faded while the content remains memorable. The timing of the sleeper effect is crucial. It typically occurs after a delay of several weeks or months. The effect doesn't happen immediately. There must be sufficient time for source memory to fade while content memory remains strong. Understanding the sleeper effect helps us become more conscious of how our opinions form and change over time. It reminds us to consider not just what information we encounter, but where it comes from. We can train ourselves to maintain healthy skepticism about information, regardless of how familiar it becomes. The effect also highlights the importance of media literacy. We need to develop skills for tracking information sources and maintaining awareness of credibility even as time passes. This becomes increasingly important in our current information environment where content spreads rapidly and sources become obscured. Priming effect. Priming effect means that exposure to one stimulus influences how we respond to subsequent stimuli, even when we're not consciously aware of the connection. This psychological phenomenon occurs because our brain creates associations between related concepts, making certain thoughts, feelings, or behaviors more likely to occur after we encounter specific triggers. The brain works like a vast network of interconnected concepts. When one concept becomes activated through exposure, it automatically activates related concepts in our mental network. This activation happens below the threshold of conscious awareness. We don't realize that our thoughts and behaviors are being influenced by previous experiences or exposures. Research demonstrates priming effects across many domains. People who read words related to elderly stereotypes subsequently walk more slowly down hallways. Individuals exposed to words associated with rudeness interrupt others more frequently in conversations. Those who encounter achievement-related words perform better on subsequent tasks. These effects occur without conscious intention or awareness. Environmental priming is particularly powerful. The physical spaces we occupy influence our thoughts and behaviors. Churches make people more honest. Libraries encourage quiet behavior. Messy environments promote creative thinking while organized spaces encourage conventional thinking. These environmental cues prime specific mindsets and behavioral patterns. Marketing professionals extensively use priming techniques. They carefully design store environments to prime desired customer behaviors. Luxury brands use elegant displays and sophisticated music to prime feelings of exclusivity and quality. Fast food restaurants use bright colors and upbeat music to prime quick decision-making and rapid consumption. Media consumption creates widespread priming effects. The news stories we read, the movies we watch, and the social media content we consume all prime different concepts in our minds. Violence in media can prime aggressive thoughts and behaviors. Positive content can prime optimistic thinking and prosocial behaviors. Language itself serves as a priming mechanism. The words we use and hear shape our subsequent thoughts and actions. Politicians carefully choose language that primes voters to think about issues in specific ways. Therapists use language patterns that prime healing and positive change in their clients. Cultural priming occurs when exposure to cultural symbols or concepts influences behavior. Seeing national flags can prime patriotic feelings and behaviors. Religious symbols can prime moral thinking and ethical behavior. These cultural primes operate automatically and influence us even when we're not consciously thinking about their meaning. Priming effects can be temporary or long-lasting depending on various factors. Strong emotional primes tend to have longer-lasting effects. Repeated exposure to the same primes can create more permanent changes in thought patterns and behavioral tendencies. The unconscious nature of priming makes it both powerful and concerning. We may believe our thoughts and decisions are entirely our own when they're actually being influenced by subtle environmental and contextual factors. This has important implications for personal autonomy and decision-making. Understanding priming helps us become more aware of the subtle influences affecting our daily lives. We can learn to recognize when we might be experiencing priming effects and make more conscious decisions about the environments and media we expose ourselves to. Peak End Rule. Peak End Rule describes how people judge experiences based primarily on how they felt at the most intense moment and at the end of the experience, rather than the average feeling throughout the entire duration. This psychological principle reveals that our memory and evaluation of experiences are heavily influenced by these two specific moments. The rule operates because our brain doesn't store every moment of an experience with equal weight. Instead, it creates a mental summary based on the most emotionally salient moments. The peak moment, whether positive or negative, becomes disproportionately important in how we remember the entire experience. The ending moment also carries special significance because it's the last impression left in our memory. Research has demonstrated this effect across numerous contexts. Patients undergoing uncomfortable medical procedures rate their experience based on the peak discomfort and how they felt when the procedure ended. Even if most of the procedure was relatively tolerable, a painful peak or ending significantly influences their overall evaluation. Customer service experiences illustrate the peak end rule clearly. A restaurant visit might have mediocre food and slow service throughout most of the meal. However, if the dessert is exceptional and the server provides excellent attention during payment, customers rate the entire experience positively. The peak moment of great dessert and positive ending override the earlier problems. The entertainment industry understands this principle well. Movie directors carefully craft climactic scenes and endings because they know these moments will disproportionately influence audience satisfaction. A mediocre film with an exciting peak and satisfying ending will be rated higher than a consistently good film with a weak ending. Retail experiences also demonstrate the peak end rule. Customers might wait in long lines and encounter various frustrations during shopping. However, if they find an amazing deal at some point and the checkout process is smooth and friendly, they leave with positive feelings about the store. The duration of an experience has surprisingly little impact on our overall evaluation. Psychologists call this duration neglect. We don't automatically prefer shorter negative experiences or longer positive ones. What matters most is the intensity of the peak and the quality of the ending. This principle has important implications for how we design experiences for others. Healthcare providers can improve patient satisfaction by managing peak moments of discomfort and ensuring positive endings to appointments. Teachers can enhance student satisfaction with courses by creating memorable peak learning moments and ending classes on positive notes. Personal relationships also follow the peak end rule. Arguments between partners are remembered based on the most intense moments and how the conflict was resolved. Vacations are evaluated based on the best moments and the final day's experience rather than any problems that occurred in the middle. Understanding the peak end rule can help us make better decisions about our own experiences. We can deliberately create positive peaks and endings in activities we design for ourselves. We can also use this knowledge to reframe negative experiences by focusing on any positive peaks or endings that occurred. The rule also helps explain why first impressions and last impressions are so important. While the peak end rule focuses on the most intense moment and the ending, beginnings also carry special weight in our memory and evaluation systems.